All right. So we started the day out yesterday with Michael Ramsey, current use section chief, who I'm not sure if he's back with us or not. I know his system was rebooting. And he gave us an overview for the first hour of the current use program with some good information. And I believe that he also shared that presentation out to Com 60 yesterday afternoon once the class had finished. Um, in our documentation, we just have a couple of bullet points here that the current use property or current use again is a property tax benefit program for working lands and active agricultural managed forest land and conservation. You know, most enrollments need a minimum of 25 acres, but with every rule, there are exceptions and different qualifiers. So reach out to your current use staff if you have questions about those things. Anything else here on this first slide, Christy?
I think just reiterating that you don't have to know all the rules for current use. And you certainly don't want to claim to know all the rules when you talk to taxpayers. So refer them to current use number and have them get an application and ask their questions there.
Absolutely. It's okay to try to know, but always defer to the professionals. That way you're not responsible for the answer if it's incorrect.
Absolutely.
Right. And we provided, as well as Michael provided, the 2025 use values per acre. You might want to jot these down if you're interested in doing all this fun math that we've been talking about. So for 2025, the ag value per acre is $510. Forest, non-productive forest and conservation is $203 per acre, and forest, non-productive forest and conservation greater than a mile from any class 1 to 3 road is $152 per acre. Anything here, Christy?
Just those values change each year, as does your CLA. So that's the moving target, right? Those are going to change every year. And then again, in our examples that you worked on, we used 2020, I believe, use values. So it's a little bit different, but the good part of it is it gets you thinking that this is the number that's going to change every year, and this is the variable that's going to affect taxation, even if I don't change anything else.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk about this one, Christy?
Sure. So it's important that throughout the year you kind of pay attention to what properties might be changing. So just kind of keep your eye out as properties are transferred, subdivided, etc. Is this in current use? And maybe put a tag on it or something that I know I got to do more work later, right? So if we don't have that information on that first download or revision or module, whatever we call it, exchange, this is what we need to know. Did the property owner transfer? Is it a new owner? Is there subdivision? Is there addition to enrollment possibly? Is it under a life estate, or have you changed acreage or other things because of surveys or maps?
All right, and those current use files should be available for you in your VTPIE module sometime mid-March, so coming very soon. I don't know if Michael has an ETA on those for you, but the statutory date to provide them is March 15th annually. And we do encourage you to check your VTPIE work list on a regular basis, preferably weekly. Same with homestead declarations. That way we can make sure we stay on top of these enrollments. And should anything change, you can get that information to current use sooner than later. Anything else here, Christy?
When I talked to Pat, what we had discussed was after this training, we would then release the current use information. So I suspect it'll be out next week, and I certainly will let folks know on listserv when it is.
Perfect. And Christy, would you like to talk about the cyclical nature of this process?
Sure. So when we do current use, we have to think about it that we're not, it's an ongoing process all the way through until possibly as late as November, even December. We want to get it done, but we got to get it done once, and then there might be subsequent changes. So if you think about it in this loop, so to speak, we want to always upload our CAMA data first. That might be from an outside CAMA vendor, or you're going through NIMRIC as your CAMA upload. Either way, you want to get all those changes in first. We want to make sure that we've processed our homesteads, and then we go into current use, and we're going to edit each one as we've talked about, save and verify. Then we're going to download back to billing to NIMRIC so that we make sure that we're getting all exemptions that are in place right now that I've just done. And then remember, we talked about it's like a tennis game. So now I've got to go back to NIMRIC and I've got to receive it into the billing in order to get it there. And then I'm going to check and make sure everything is the way I want it to be in NIMRIC. And then again, probably the next week or in a couple weeks, depending on how often I'm in my office, I'm going to do it all again. And I'm going to keep doing this process in that order, right? Until I have all current use properties, what we call completed, certified and completed. Okay.
All right. Sorry, technical difficulties. So the next few slides are just some screenshots of what you're going to expect to see when you go into the VTPIE program this year, if you have not already been there or are not familiar. The key part for everything that we're going to do this year, if your intention is to be working in your 2025 grand list, you need to make sure that the drop down that appears at the top of your screen on the left actually indicates 2025. This is the first year that we've had multiple years available to us. So just keep that in mind. If something looks a little bit weird or you don't have buttons available to you, it's likely because you're in 2024 and that functionality has been closed because we're not working there anymore. And then let's see, we will of course give a demo on the inner workings of VTPIE towards the end of the day today. Anything here on this slide, Christy?
No, I think you got it.
All right. Again, more screenshots of what you'll see. So this is just the progression. We go from the main screen, tax programs, current use module, and right from that button, you will see your work queue if there's anything there and available for you to work on. Christy and I reviewed the main application screen that you see when you click on any of the records. This is just an overview, and then we talked about each of these pieces individually, how it's important to check your CLA, and I don't think that this one is emphasized enough. Honestly, we want to make sure that the CLA that shows on the application screen on the left-hand side is reflective of the CLA that was provided to you as a result of the equalization study that you received in December, or if you appeal, whatever the result of that appeal is. The exception there being reappraisal towns that are reappraising specifically for this 2025 year, that's when it's taking effect. This CLA should be a 1.0. Anything else here, Christy?
Just if it's wrong, stop right there and call us. If that CLA is wrong, don't proceed forward. We should have a big stop sign there, right? If incorrect, stop here and contact your DA as soon as possible so that we can get it fixed.
And then we talked about how it is important to understand or review that the grand list owner that you have most or uploaded in your most recent CAMA upload matches reasonably to the PVR owner account that shows on your screen. If the number of owners is different, if the names are different, if it's gone into a life estate or a trust, anything that looks like it has changed the ownership must be reported to current use. They may already know if the attorneys have done their PTTRs correctly, but for those of us who have been doing this for a while, we know that those are not always correct. And we'll show you how to report that information to current use shortly. Anything there, Christy?
Right, so if it was, if the right-hand side was listed as Mary and Timothy, and the left hand was Timothy and Mary, we're okay, because it's the same ownership. But if one had only Timothy, and the other one had Timothy and Mary, then we've got different ownership. So we need to report it and make sure that what is legally recorded in our land records is correct, which is the most important part for this, because of course it's a lien on the property. So we want to make sure that that's correct.
will say that the DAs did request a name mismatch report for current use, but realizing that the ownership order in a deed rarely matches the ownership when it's written out on a current use application, that would have basically given us every record back.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we haven't provided that, and it would probably mostly just kind of be annoying. So that's why we need for you in your offices to pay attention to these two pieces of information. Similarly, if the span number is different from the enrollment information versus the grand list span, we need to figure out why. 9 times out of 10, these things are going to match. When they don't, I tend to find that it's because of subdivision or being purchased by an abutter. And we will show you how to correct that span if it is incorrect. Anything there, Christy?
No, I think we're good. I was just looking at the chat and wondering if Jen, are you monitoring that or someone else?
I
Is Terry on today?
she asked, I forgot that she had asked me yesterday because she was gone this morning.
Okay.
So
I'm just gonna get distracted if I'm trying to do that as well. I'm already getting distracted.
okay. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Teresa probably would if you'd like me to ask her.
No, it's totally fine. I just had forgotten as you said chat. I was like, oh, I think that was me. Let's see.
I'm happy to help too.
Oh, there she is.
Should you download to billing every time you verify and submit is one question. And I think maybe you answered it, but
Yes, you should. It's not going to hurt anything. And then make sure you go to NIMRIC and receive it.
someone would like a refresher on the acronym DA.
So your district advisor is a state employee who is assigned to your town. You need to find out who that is. We have a nice little map on our website. And they can help you with all things listing and, listing and tax related.
If you submit a question, should you still use the verify button?
So those two things operate independently. So you can have a question thread going back and forth with your current use staff with whether you have saved and verified or not. I don't know if Michael has been able to jump back on, if he knows something differently on their end. I know each question that is entered actually creates a work item or will show for your current use specialist to resolve. Or maybe there's another current use staff member if Michael's not available.
No, I'm here now. My computer didn't restart like it said it was going to do. So I'm wondering if it's going to do it without me knowing. But now, what exactly was the question again about the questions? I mean, we receive questions on VTax and on VTPIE. So, and that's usually a way for us to communicate back and forth between the lister.
Sure. So I think the question was whether or not let's see, how was it worded?
It was, if you submit a question, should you then use the verify button?
Right. So are you receiving questions regardless of whether or not they have saved and verified?
I don't think we have a verified button, so I actually don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so that is an important point. So the current use staff doesn't actually have a verify button. That is something that is specific to the lister function. So when Michael and his staff are looking at this screen, they probably, when they're looking at theirs, don't see this verify button, nor do they see the pop-up box where we do our work. So I think
sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say, I think that it's really important to understand what question you're posing to current use as to whether you want to verify the application, in my experience. If it's that something has completely transferred out of these people's names and you don't have a new application in your queue yet, you might not, you might want to pose the question that the property, has changed ownership and the PTTR date, as all of the things you've said previously, and you might want to leave that in your queue and not verify. But maybe you and Christy feel differently.
I personally think whenever you can verify, because you always get another chance. So don't panic. That was one of the take homes from yesterday. Don't panic. You get several rounds to do this again. If you submitted verify and you did something wrong, you're going to get another chance. You can always open it back up and we can get back into that person and fix it. What's your opinion, Deanna?
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the fact that when the current use staff changes something and requires another review from the listers, as well as CAMA uploads or homestead declaration changes, repopulating those records for your attention. So I think we should use the system that I think the way that it was intended to be used, in my opinion. Do whatever is available for you in the work queue. Should something change down the road, as we know things do, then it will be populated for another look.
Yep.
And we can all cross our fingers that that first pass is actually perfect with no additional changes, and then you'll be done.
And last question is, there's some questions that people have for NEMRIC. Do you know if NEMRIC has a training? Is that something they should ask us? And it was suggested to speak with Chris at NEMRIC.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, as the provider of the program, is a good first choice. I would say that the majority of the district advisors have very intricate knowledge of the NEMRIC products, both my NEMRIC Grand List module and the CAMA program, so we can likely help you with whatever your questions are. Would you agree with that, Christy?
Yes. We're not giving NEMRIC training here if that's the question. Because current use doesn't reside in NEMRIC anymore, other than to receive the exemption and load it into NEMRIC for tax billing, which is where most folks are still going to be doing tax billing.
Yep, which we have not gotten to yet, but we certainly will.
Yep.
All right, is that all the questions about the course itself?
Yes.
Okay.
Will the lister calendar be updated for this year? Is the last one. I know that's not necessarily close.
I'm hoping to get it out today or Monday, waiting on finalizing a few classes that are later in the year. But it's important to understand that the lister's calendar is specifically meant to go from March to March, because that is a lister year. And if we don't do that, we won't be able to put any classes on the lister calendar. So it's the compromise to try to get as many on before we send it out to you that we possibly can.
All right, I think the chat dried up. Let's continue on with our overview. So again, we're talking about communicating with current use. We will show this to you when we do the demo later this morning. And then when we do go through that process of the demo, we will look at all of these different baubles and what information you should be looking for and putting in each of the fields. We talked about why acreages might mismatch. I don't know if it's worth reviewing anything here, Christy.
These are just some examples. Did the owner purchase contiguous land? Did the owner sell off land? Did the tax map show different, so you adjusted acreage based on your tax map? And then just making sure that your acreage is the same from one system to another and in all the multiple places, because that can be super confusing. There's data entry places for acreage, and then there's value places for acreage. So just making sure all of those are the same so you don't get confused.
Absolutely. Oh. I'm just gonna kind of go fast through the slides that are redundant. I don't think that enough emphasis can be placed on this particular issue. 9 out of the 10 questions that I get phone calls on personally are why a lister can't put a number in a certain box in the VTPIE program. The system is programmed in a way that unless there is a homestead file currently on the parcel, you cannot enter anything in the homestead file or homestead column. Conversely, if there is any non-homestead value at all on the parcel and they have filed a homestead, you can't put all of the value in the homestead column.
Mhm. So
we must wait for those homestead declarations to come in or be updated before we can shuffle those values between the columns. I know it feels frustrating, but again, anytime those flags change or the value changes, that record is going to repopulate for you to shuffle the numbers and re-verify and save.
Deanna, someone is asking before we get too far, remind me again of the H and I bobbles on the last slide. I think they meant
Sure.
bubbles. Sorry.
Yep. So the H bubble should have been I at the top of the screen. Let me get back there. So at the in your document, page 6, and I apologize, I did not include page numbers, but if they're stapled in an order, this should be kind of easy to find. This H at the top where it's next to land value, that should have been an I. And this I next to improvement value should have been a J to correspond with your documentation. All right, let me go through a few slides about where you're putting and finding the homestead and non-homestead files or information, as well as whether or not a homestead has in fact been filed. We talked about the use value acreage and how to calculate that in later on in the morning. I don't know if there's anything in particular you want to say about use value, Christy?
No, I think we'll go through the calculation enough so folks will get it.
Perfect. So we talked about the owner's taxable value, the amount of the exemption that shows on the tax bill, how to reconcile or check to see if you're getting the correct split of your land value. So both your excluded and enrolled land value should total your land value at the top of your screen. Conversely, the total for your dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings plus your farm buildings should equal the improvement value at the top of your screen. Just a couple of checks that you can do on your own to see where things might be awry if they don't, if you can't save and verify. And then we started talking about land schedule and multipliers. Christy?
Yeah, so this is kind of my beloved baby, so to speak. I love to teach about land schedule, and I think it's so super important that folks understand how their land schedule works, how it was developed, and that they can explain it to folks. So understanding that your land schedule is behind the scenes, right? It was developed at the time of reappraisal based on land selling in your area. It was adjusted and represents average land for your area. Now, what's average for you might be different than what's average for another town in terms of attributes. So kind of knowing what your average is also important in that piece. And then there are multipliers applied to that average, the land schedule numbers, right? For things like neighborhood, and then also physical features like topography, grade, view, access, drainage, etc. And they all go into one grade that we call, the overall grade or the physical grade of the property. If you have some sort of different CAMA system, they deal with the same thing, but in a little bit different terminology. So they might have things that are called like influence factors, but it's the same idea. It's always the same concept, right? You start with a base and then you have multipliers to the base. And then within that land schedule, we're going to have what's called a full or site inclusive land schedule, and we're going to have a residual. And what the whole land schedule represents is what we call a volume discount or economy of scale, which we talked about, like when you go to Costco and you buy things in bulk, you're going to get a better price per item when you buy in bulk than you do if you buy one or two. So it's the same idea the way land sells. The less you buy, the more you pay. The more you buy, the less per item you're going to pay. Volume discount. It's the eggs that we talked about.
And eggs, I mentioned that Christy likes to travel around with colorful plastic eggs in her class because we used to do all of our trainings in person and it was a good visual. But this diagram is explaining how if you purchase that dozen, because you're buying, say, in bulk, it's going to cost you less per piece than if you were to buy fewer or just a single item or an acre in our scenario. And then we had a sample of a land schedule that we're hoping most of you or some of you have found in your offices while doing your work. Most often you'll get this at the time of reappraisal, but can certainly ask your contractor to export or provide you something from your CAMA program, correct, Christy?
Correct. So if you have Microsoft, you can certainly call Chris and he can export for you an Excel document that will represent what's in the background for your land schedule. Any other program would be able, they'd be able to do the same thing. I don't ever recommend somebody get in there and start mucking with any tables. So it's probably best to talk to your provider and ask them to print it out for you or make it accessible to you so you can print it out at least.
Someone asked, does the land grade change when someone cuts valuable timber, or for that matter, has timber that's valuable, nice mature hardwoods versus lousy pine trees with no value?
Way to go, Christy.
Go ahead.
Sure. So the answer is not unlike many things that we teach. It depends.
Yep.
So if you have a land schedule that is applied in a manner across the board without consideration of the timber in the first place, then the answer would be no. If you recognize during reappraisal that wooded parcels, primarily in my area, maple wooded parcels, sell for more, and then it's clear cut, then you might want to have a discussion with your listers, or if you're a sole assessor, you might want to take a look and see what the market shows. Is the impact of that would be, what are you valuing an open piece of land versus a fully wooded mapled lot? It's going to be different for every market. But ultimately, if you're not differentiating in value between wooded and open lots, then the answer is unequivocally going to be no. Until the time of reappraisal, if you do see evidence that those things are selling differently, and then you can talk to your contractor for your new land schedule and new policy. There is a specific statute that says you cannot value timber, which is where we kind of run into a little bit of a hiccup here. What that statute specifically means is that you can't go out and count the mature trees and apply a value per tree. It does not mean that you cannot recognize that wooded parcels are selling differently than open parcels. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, and it really does depend on your market.
Yep.
So unfortunately, this is the answer that people don't like, that we have to give a lot, is it depends, because every market is a little bit different.
And then someone, sorry, are you guys set with that one?
Yep. No,
Yep.
go ahead.
Okay. Someone says, I understand the more you buy, the less you pay, but it seems a bit regressive. I don't know if we have anything to add to that, but.
It's the way the market works. It's the way land sells. And what we're trying to do when we value real estate is reflect the way something sells.
I mean, I guess at some point in time, it might be indicative of a market that the larger the parcel, the more it's selling for, but that's not something that you're going to find until those sales start to happen. It's just not typical of the market. I don't think I've personally ever seen it. Have you, Christy?
No, not in my 30 years.
Okay, and I think that's it. Someone else asked about a property owner. I didn't know the answer, and back to what you guys were saying in the beginning, I think it's important that we utilize the current use department for questions like that, and you should feel like you should be able to refer that property owner to call the current use department because they know those rules and they can answer those questions.
Yeah, and I can't say it enough. I would stay away from trying to tell them all the pieces. You know, you have to have 25 acres. You have to be a qualified farmer. You have to, well, there's a lot of caveats to all of those things. So I don't even try to, inform them other than to say, you know what, you probably got to talk with them because I'm not sure if you would qualify.
Sure. And I do see that someone else said timber value is not considered. Again, we're not considering timber value itself because that would be contrary to statute. We're considering how a piece of land is selling and what is the attribute of those parcels that are selling for more. We have to take that into consideration when we're building our land schedule and when we're applying grade factors.
Yep. And so the last piece of this, while we're on this slide, Deanna, is also super important because it's going to be part of this process that you're going to be coding land to do some of that valuation of excluded land. So you have to know how the codes work and how they relate to the schedule. Otherwise, you're going to get numbers that don't make sense, right? So you have to know in my Canvas system, how do I code land to make it reflect site land schedule? And how do I code land to make it reflect residual land schedule?
And we just had some fly-ins come up on the screen to illustrate that the left-hand side of your screen is showing a full schedule that includes the value of a site. So if you have a 10-acre parcel and you wanted to have the grade be, or for the entire 10 acres, the same grade for the entire 10 acres, then you can utilize the chart on the left. It's going to give you your first 2 acres at 65,000. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the residual bulk. So we're doing this to illustrate that if they're the same grade, you're going to get the same answer. So if we have 2 acres at 65,000 on the left-hand schedule and 60,000 for the additional 8 acres on the right-hand schedule, if you add them together, your result is 125, which is identical to the result of just having the parcel valued as one landline.
Right.
Anything there, Christy?
So it's all in the coding. So if I wanted to put a piece of land that was 10 acres and I didn't want to show the site in Microsolve, I would code it as acreage total or 2.6 in our program, right? Because the total is what refers it to that full land schedule or site inclusive. I would get the 125,000. Or I can do it in 2 pieces and say I want to have my 2-acre site plus my residual. I'm still getting the same number, but it allows me to break out the site. And some folks decide to do that like once it's developed in the first 2 acres and you're showing it differently so you can grade the 2 pieces separately. But you just want to be careful because the example that I gave yesterday is if you accidentally coded something with a total for the back acreage, you're going to get another site value in there and you're going to overcharge that parcel significantly.
Christy, is there an influence factor % on topography? What's the highest number you would give and why?
You're not going to like the answer. Depends. Right?
That's definitely a good question.
Right.
I was going to say for the land
equals
schedule class.
right. 1.0 equals average, right? So I can go below that with 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. I can go above it with 1.1, 1.2. I can go all the way up, right? But it really depends on your market. I don't know. I can't tell you, right? How much does the market recognize things are selling for above what that average is? And how much of that is attributable to topography? So can't answer that. If you're not sure, look at ones that might be similar in your town. See what you did.
And I think the important part there is that discussion is best had during the point of reappraisal. because that is the point in time that your contractor or you, if you're doing your own, which doesn't happen very much anymore, set your land schedule.
Yep.
So those are things that need to be taken into consideration then. And whatever methodology you establish at the time of reappraisal, whether or not it makes sense right before you start your next reappraisal or not, you have to continue with that methodology to keep your equity in your grand list.
Yep.
We noted that research for current use is very, very common, particularly with new applications, but also with any changes or just refreshing your memory. Things that are going to help you with your research are going to be your own property tax maps within your office, your lister's cost sheet or property record card, the deed for the property, the current use maps that are provided by the current use staff. We did have the question yesterday about whether or not they would be available in VTPIE, and the hope was maybe someday, but we're not there yet. The current use application and the current use local parcel report, which will show you how to run out of the program when we do our demo. But I think the piece that's most often missed in current use review is the site inspection. There are pieces that might require you to go out in person and see exactly what the condition of the property is, particularly for the excluded portion of the property. And we'll talk about that more. Anything there, Christy?
And
Yeah,
I'll actually just add real quick, for those towns that have their deeds available online electronically, it's very helpful for us. It doesn't require us to call you and distract you from what you're doing. So if you haven't taken that initiative, it's helpful for us anyway.
So I just wanted to
Michael.
I was going to reiterate here that you're not going to go out and site inspect all your current use properties. Okay, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is if you're valuing a excluded portion of the land that you don't know and you can't tell from the map what that excluded portion looks like or what the attributes are, then that's when you might need to get in the car and go to that property. If you can't determine what the farm buildings are on a property, you might have to go have a conversation with the person and figure it out and have a site inspection. So there are certainly places in processing current use that you might need to get in the car and go out to that property. It's not saying you have to go out every year to every property that's in current use. That's not what we're saying. It's just, as with all assessing, if you don't know, you got to get in the car. You got to go see it, right?
Absolutely. Then we talked about the pieces and parts that we have to allocate for value. You will be required to provide separate values for dwelling and site improvements that are non-farm building or non-enrolled farm buildings. If there are enrolled farm buildings, you will have to provide a value in the program for those enrolled buildings. And then we have to calculate the value of excluded land, and from that we can glean the value of the enrolled land. And during our example review, I think that'll be covered pretty well. The caveat here being that statute does specifically dictate how we value the excluded land. In Title 32 VSA 3756, I believe Section D, which is also available in its full text at the back of your document. We have a section there for statutes. It is explaining that legislature has directed us, whether we agree or not, that we must look at that excluded land as though it is a standalone parcel and value it as such. Anything to add there, Christy?
So in layman's terms, standalone parcel means however many acres I've excluded, those are how many eggs I have for my excluded land calculation. Only those acres. We look at it as independent, standalone. We're doing a value just on that for excluded land purposes, which, as you could tell from the land schedule when we looked at it, that's going to put the higher portion on the excluded land.
Right. And again, allocating these values should absolutely never involve changing your total grand list value. So if you happen to be in your CAMA program working through some of these calculations or creating the calculators that are available to you, if you notice that changes the overall value of the parcel, you have done something wrong and you need to go back and fix it. Anything there, Christy?
Yep, you are trying to take your existing data and allocate the pieces to get all of them to add back up to what you had for a listed value. You're not trying to change anything because of current use being in place.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to go through these really quick. These are all of the, I think, 16 steps to allocation or 15 steps that we had, and we're going to review those ad nauseum while we go through the examples, unless you had something here you wanted to touch on, Christy.
I do not. Go for it.
Okay. All right. We talked about checking how your numbers match. During our examples, we're going to give you a couple of different ways to add or calculate these allocations. So I think we can skip this one too, Christy.
Yep.
Okay.
I think just the important part is when you're working in VTPIE, you won't know if all your numbers match until you go to the bottom and you click on Save and Verify. That's when it adds up all your columns for you and make sure that it's matching your grand list.
Right.
You can certainly do it by hand as you go along. You can do your math, right? Like we're doing here. But you're not going to know in the system until you try to click Save and Verify whether or not it's all adding up.
All right, we talked about a couple of examples and we gave some screenshots that are available in your document as well of how you're going to utilize the current use calculator in the NEMRIC program specifically.
Yep, so they have specific coding in Microsoft for current use acres, and I know he now also has coding for farm buildings so that you can get a summary sheet for current use, which is kind of nice. If you're not sure about that, we'll work through it with you, or you can speak with Chris at NEMRIC about it. And Todd, did you want to add anything? Maybe unmute Todd LeBlanc for a minute, Jen?
Yep, just a second here. While I'm doing that, do you want to quickly answer, does the allocated values need to be done on every parcel enrolled?
Yes, but if you're not doing a reappraisal, you're not going to have to redo every single one because they're already in place from last year. So what you're going to be looking at is everything the same? Okay, if it's the same and I haven't changed anything or an application hasn't changed anything, then I'm likely just going to be able to breeze right through those, right? I'm going to be able to verify those quickly. It's the ones that are either new or changed that I'm going to have to do a whole new allocation on and really think through this process. So it sounds super painful, but you're not going to have to do this calculation on every single one every year. You're going to have to when you do a reappraisal because all your land schedule's new, right? All your numbers are new. And you're going to have to just do it on those that have changed for some reason.
Okay. Somebody also said tracking this on your 411 is a good way to know if you accidentally changed a value. The total listed real value shouldn't change on the 411, just current use, correct?
Correct. Good point. Yep.
All right.
I have unmuted Todd, so I don't know if he's tried to unmute.
I think what he's done is put the link to the summary calculator in the chat. So if folks want to click on that later, you can just see what that looks like. Okay, which is what I was referring to.
Yep. The only thing that I would caution for those who are going to start using or have started using the new current use function in the Microsoft product, under site improvements, there is a button, I believe, that allows you to add a site improvement to current use. It has been determined by the previous current use director or section chief, I don't remember what her title was specifically, that site improvements are not eligible for exclusion through the current use program. So if you have a barn or another building that has a dedicated water and sewer and you provide value for that, that value cannot be exempt.
Mhm.
So just be very careful if you're using that to not code site improvements to current use allocation. Whether we agree or not, that's the rule.
Yep. So site improvements for the barn, etc., if they're separate, those are taxable.
Sure.
Can you repeat that? Someone's asking you, it says, they're saying, Deanna, can you please repeat that?
Sure. I'm not good at repeating things the exact same way, so hopefully I don't confuse anyone. What I said is the current use program does not allow an exemption for site improvements. And by that, I mean your water and your sewer or landscape if you happen to value landscape. So if you have enrolled farm buildings that have dedicated water and or sewer, you cannot exempt that value, even though I believe that the calculator will allow you to code it that way. It has been the opinion of the previous current use director that only the building value is exempt based on the statutory language.
Yep.
All right. Do we have any other questions before we go on?
Can a container placed on agricultural current use parcel disqualify the land from enrollment?
I would say call your current use specialist.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome, Linda.
Usually in cases like this, we require a lot of pictures and information because container, container can mean very different things to different people.
That's fair. So I guess like several other things, the answer is it depends.
It depends. Does.
All right. And then we talked about the difference between the current use calculator sheet and your original cost sheet. We went through that exercise, which again, we're going to go through in our examples. Anything you wanted to chat about here, Christy?
I would just really encourage folks to print this out. I think it's valuable to have it when you're explaining it to a taxpayer, that this is how we're using our land schedule according to statute to calculate your excluded land.
Absolutely. Particularly for those who are just starting out, doing the math just really helps it sink in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we gave the example of the math and how that worked out. Again, we're going to go through our examples. We
And
talked
again,
about where, oh, go ahead.
sorry, can you just go back? I really also encourage people to write this calculation right on the bottom of that sheet. You print out your excluded land calculation and then you write this right on it. So you're going that next step to say, okay, and then your land was worth this. I am subtracting from that because I have to value excluded land according to statute, and this is what I'm left for your full value for enrolled land.
Certainly. Great. And then we talked about enrolled farm buildings, if they do exist, how you will identify that in the VTPIE program, in addition to the application, that the paper application you should have in front of you, and where to put that value. Again, we'll talk about that in our examples. Anything special here, Christy?
The only thing I would say is do not assume just because you think something looks like a farm building, it doesn't mean it's an enrolled farm building. Okay, an enrolled farm building means it's passed the test with current use department to say they don't have to pay taxes on it. So it's super important that we're keeping stringent eye on what they actually enrolled for buildings.
Are site improvements for farm employee housing exempt?
No. So they should be taxable. In other words, they're not included in the farm building line. They should be in the non-homestead line above that.
All right. And then we again talked about comparing your total listed value to your homestead value for the property. The end result of each of these columns, or at least the total listed value in the homestead column, should match your cost report. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope.
All right, again, if your columns total appropriately, you will see a green banner at the top of the page that says you've successfully saved and verified. As Christy pointed out yesterday, as with most math problems or functions like this, you can force the numbers to work, but you need to also understand that if they're not correct, you're going to affect the taxability of that taxpayer. So it's important to know how to do this math. And then if it doesn't match, you'll see a pink or a red banner displayed at the top of your screen, and you will not be allowed to save and verify until you have adjusted your calculations. Anything there, Christy?
Nope.
All right. So now we're on to the part of the program where we had an example. So for those of you who were able to join us yesterday, we went through this already, but we're going to go ahead and do it one more time because the math and the steps are important. And we hope that you had the opportunity to finish problems 2 through 5 overnight or this morning before class started. So the pieces that were provided to you in an additional documentation with our course document were cost reports and information to complete each of these problems. If you don't have that additional packet, please refer back to the Comp 60 listserv emails that went out 2 days ago and then again yesterday. So the pieces of information that we are going to focus on for these problems, or this problem today, we first want to identify the total acres on the parcel. So we have a total of 21 acres. And this taxpayer has enrolled 19 agricultural acres, which gives us a remaining of 2 acres that they have excluded, or remainder. Again, as Christy mentioned before, we're using 2020 use values so that we don't have to redo these calculations annually. For this problem, this taxpayer has enrolled 3 farm buildings. It is in fact a homestead property. And the CLA for that year for this town is a 1.0427. So these are all of the pieces of information that we're going to need to work through this problem. All right, Christy?
Okay. So the first thing we need to look at is how many acres did they exclude? We said it was 2 acres excluded. We look at the current use map and we check to make sure that what is excluded is that the same 2 acres that we're valuing on our cost sheet, which is the site acreage. In this case, it is. So we don't have to do any special calculations for this because we do have the 2 acres right on our cost sheet. So we have the 71.5 for our excluded land, and we can go ahead and put that right in our grid. I think I lost my other page that shows the grid. Sorry, hold on a second. There we go. Okay, so we're going to put that right in under homestead because we know it's a homestead and excluded land. So column 2, row 3, 71.5. We can also put it in the total column, column 1, row 3, excluded land. And then our next calculation is to say, okay, now that I've done that per statute as a standalone parcel, how am I going to know what my enrolled land is? So as a matter of course, what we're going to do is take our total land value, in this case 156.4, and subtract what we've allocated according to statute, 71.5. That leaves us with 84.9. It's the same as what we see in this example, although it will not always be. That is the caveat. So we can go ahead and put in our grid, 19 acres of enrolled land, and under column 2, row 4, we can put 84.9. And also in the total, under enrolled land, column 1, row 4, we can put 84.9. Okay? Next step we like to do is to isolate what the enrolled farm buildings are. And if you'll remember, we said part of our information provided to us was that there were 3 enrolled farm buildings. So we look at our cost sheet and we say, okay, do I have 3? Are they matching? Can I identify what they are? Does it make sense that they're farm buildings, etc.? We got to really dig into this and make sure which ones they are. And it looks super easy in class, but it's not when you're in the office. It's going to be a little more complicated what these enrolled farm buildings are. So for example purposes, we do have 3. They total to 113.9. So we can go ahead and put that in our grid under non-homestead because by definition, enrolled farm buildings are always non-homestead. So we're going to put that 113.9 in column 3, row 2, 113.9. Non-homestead enrolled farm buildings. And then we can also put it in the total column, column 1, row 2, 113.9. Okay, next step. Now that we've isolated what our enrolled farm buildings are, our next question is to say, do we have any other non-homestead value? So but you can easily do that mathematically by saying, what's my total value minus my homestead on my cost sheet? That equals my non-homestead. Okay? Does this match what I've just allocated for my enrolled farm buildings? If so, fine. I'm done. I don't have any more non-homestead. Okay? If not, I have some more that I have to deal with and I have to figure out what it is. So in this case, 113.9 is my non-homestead value. That equals what I've allocated for farm buildings. So I'm good to go. I can put a 0 or cross out the line for non-homestead under dwelling and enrolled farm buildings. Column 3, row 1.
I'd just like to point out, this is a very, very clean example.
Yes.
It does fit some scenarios, but it's not always going to be as easy as taking the total of your outbuildings. So
Yes.
just keep that in mind. That's why we're providing the calculations for you so that you can identify any remaining value, like for those site improvements that might be flagged
Yes.
as non-homestead. Or my example yesterday was the farmer's wife had a pottery studio in an outbuilding and she ran a business from it.
Yep, that's where it gets a little more dicey. And then the next step is to say, okay, what have I not yet allocated for? So you could take your homestead value minus your land and say, okay, everything else is going to go into my homestead dwellings. Or another way that I proposed to you yesterday is as you're going along, you could be highlighting all these things on your cost sheet that you've allocated for, and you can simply look and say, okay, what do I have left? Does it make sense that those numbers would go in the dwelling field under homestead? So if you were doing that, what you would have had left was site improvements and replacement cost new less depreciation, which would also equal 276.8. It would be the 261.8 plus the 15,000 for site improvements. That's what we have yet not allocated for. So that 276.8 is going to go under homestead, column 2, dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings, row 1. And then you could also put it in the total column under column 1, row 1. Okay, there's our 276, just a different way to do it. Total value minus land, minus enrolled farm buildings, leaves us what we've got left.
And again,
Okay.
reiterating that if these numbers don't match, you may have unenrolled business use, or you may have to check your coding.
Can you repeat that?
I'm going to walk through the grid as we go now. Okay,
Okay.
I think that's what
Okay.
people are concerned about. Okay,
Thank you.
maybe that'll answer it. Okay, so the first thing we did was figured out our excluded land, right? 71.5. We put that under homestead because we know it's a homestead, so therefore all land is going to be homestead. And we put it under the total. And then we couldn't put 0 in the non-homestead for that land. And then we calculated our enrolled land at 84.9. We can put that in the homestead box as well as the total box for enrolled land. And we can put 0 in the non-homestead box. We then figured out what our enrolled farm buildings were worth, which was 113.9. We know that those are by definition non-homestead, so we can put the 113.9 in the non-homestead enrolled farm buildings box, and we can put it also in the total box. There will never be homestead enrolled farm buildings because by definition they never are. I think you aren't even allowed to enter anything in that box in VTPIE, so that's a win. And then we
That is
went it.
correct, yep.
Then we went ahead and calculated what else was left for values and if it was homestead, and we determined that it was, which was 276.8. We're going to put that in the dwelling and non-enrolled farm building box and also in the total box there because we had no other non-homestead use. And then we can go ahead and total those columns up, which VTPIE will do for you once you hit verify and save, or you can just have your calculator next to you if you like to calculate it yourself. And then we went ahead and showed you how you would calculate use value if you wanted to, understanding that these use values are different and that the CLA adjustment will be different for your town and different each year. But for this example, we had 19 acres of agricultural land, which was $382 per acre. And our CLA in this example was 1.0427. So 19 times 382 times 1.0427 is 7,568 or 7,600 rounded to the nearest hundred. So that is our use value, which we will then enter under the total and also under the homestead box. Why under the homestead? Because our land is in the homestead. So our use value follows where our land goes. And then now we have our taxable. So this is the piece that I think is important for you to understand to explain to taxpayers, okay? They pay full value on non-enrolled farm buildings. So full tax on 276,800. That's the green star. They pay full value on excluded land, 71.5. That's the blue star. And then rather than pay on our assessed value of 84.9 on the enrolled land, they're going to pay on use value. So that's the yellow star. So if we add those up, that's going to be our taxable grand list. 355,900 in this example.
Can I jump in with some questions?
Sure, let me just finish this last little piece.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were done.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
We got one more step. Okay, and then for our exempt reduction is going to be what they don't pay taxes on. So we know that enrolled farm buildings are exempt. Whatever we put in that line is going to be exempt from taxes. So 113.9. And then for the land, rather than pay on 84.9, they're going to pay on $7,600 use values. So their exemption is the difference between the two. So for the exempt reduction, if we took our enrolled farm buildings 113.9 plus 84.9 minus 7,600 that they actually pay on, our exempt reduction will be 191,200. And if you want to get to that 77,300, you would take the 84.9, that was the full value on the enrolled land, minus what they pay on, 7,600, and you get 77,300. Now we're good, Jen.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So someone's asking, it would be noted on the current use application if a farm building is part of current use and if multiple outbuildings is when we would go and verify and less clear on the cost sheet, correct?
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to say that to me again.
Yeah, I'll try to do it slower. It would be noted on the current use application if a farm building is part of current use. And if there are multiple outbuildings is when we would go to maybe go to the location to verify unless it's very clear on the cost sheet, correct?
Correct. Yep. Because what happens is, let's say that you have an old dairy barn, right? And the dairy barn has a milk house and it has an attached equipment shed and it has an attached lean-to. On your cost sheet, you called that 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 IDs for valuation. And the farmer probably called it 1 because it's their barn, right? So this is where we get into the difficulty interpreting what they meant compared to what we're valuing in pieces to get the value more correct for what it is, right?
If a farmer adds a farm building and it's not on the application, but the building is declared on the HS 122, do we suggest to the farmer to update their current use application?
Yes, because until it's on an application, it's not an enrolled farm building. And sometimes they will forget. They'll build a new farm building and they'll completely forget to update with current use.
I actually ran across a horror story in one of my towns that as new farm buildings were built, that they were just automatically added to the enrollment because they became part of that non-homestead number in the outbuildings. But there were several buildings that they had not reapplied for. So definitely something to be cognizant of. Just because it's there doesn't mean that it's excluded.
Okay. Why is the excluded land and enrolled land listed under the homestead instead of the non-homestead?
Because if a homestead is declared, then all land is homestead. And in this case, a homestead was declared. So all land is homestead on that property. That's statutory.
And then the last question, which Michael answered in the chat, but I'll say out loud is, I thought ag buildings were only eligible to be enrolled by qualifying farmers. And Michael says you are correct. It has to be owned or leased to a qualified farmer. Oh, one more just popped up. If a farm building is on the application and in current use but not used for a number of years, should we reach out to the homeowner or current use or both?
That's a
Michael,
Michael
do you wanna-
question.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how involved you want to be. If I were in your shoes, I probably wouldn't do anything about it. But if you do notice that if it's clear that it's not being used for farming, then maybe that would be a good time to reach out to us.
All right. Another thing that I wanted to mention about farm buildings in the application, I have seen applications that have, say, 5 farm buildings enrolled, and one of those items happens to be a silo or another structure that doesn't have a value on the cost report, which often causes some confusion. If you don't have a value for it, you can't provide an excluded value for it, and that's okay, because in your market, something like a silo might not actually provide additional value. That being said, if there's a reappraisal and your new contractor decides that yes, they do provide value, then it's already enrolled and it's already eligible to be excluded. So don't get tripped up by those. If you have more buildings on the application than you do on your cost report.
Yeah.
If it's grossly wrong, then I would certainly reach out to the taxpayer and to the current use, because it might mean that they applied for the wrong parcel span, something might be awry. But generally speaking, it's okay to have more buildings on the application than exist on your cost sheet. And
Gail
any
is
other questions?
saying this example says the buildings are not leased to the farmer.
It's possible that we pulled two pieces from two different applications. Don't get worked up about it.
But good point. If we were in class, you would get a
good looking
prize.
if it was your real thing.
Agricultural land like meadow, which is not used for anything. What is it? What is it designed for?
It seems like it's a current use question, but I'm not,
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah, you know, it could be open ag, but it's just, a lot of these are case by case, so it's something that the specialist would have to have a conversation with the landowner on what the use of the land is. But as we stated, you know, we talked about what the definition of agricultural land is, so it's got to meet that definition.
Right. And understanding it's not the lister's job to determine that.
Absolutely. All right. Have we caught up with questions?
I think that's all the questions.
Okay. Thanks, Jen.
Do we want to take a break before the rest of them, Deanna?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and take a break that way? If you hadn't had the opportunity to work through problems 2 through 5 and you really enjoyed the process we just went through, you can take that time to do that now. We'll take 10, 15. What do you say, Christy?
Yeah, 10 is good, I think.
10 is good. All right. So we'll be coming back at 10:35, folks. Stretch your legs, do some math. We'll see you back here.
Okay. So do you have flying arrows on all of them? Okay, so the information that we're going to need is we're going to look at total parcel acreage, what's enrolled and what program it's enrolled in, and excluded acreage. So on this example, we have 92.2 acres of forest, we have 10 acres of excluded, and we have a total of 102.20 for acreage. So assuming that we've checked and made sure all that matched, right, with what we had, meaning do we have 120.2 acres on our CAMA sheet, and does it make sense that that's what we should have? And we correlated all that, then we can go ahead and do the rest of this process. Then we also need to know what our current CLA is. In this example, it's 1.0720. So that's what we're going to use when calculating use value. Important to check that. There's also a homestead been declared on this property, so we're going to need that information. And there are 0 enrolled farm buildings, so we need that information. And now we can march forward. Here's our cost sheet. Okay, the top part is our cost sheet. And we need to first know what our excluded land is. So there are how many acres did I have? 10 acres of excluded. So I look at the current use map. If I don't have one, I'm going to ask for one from the current use department because I need to know what that 10 acres they're excluding is. Okay, I'm going to really look at that, and then I'm going to use my current use calculator to value that as a standalone parcel. So the top part is my normal cost sheet, right? 102.2 acres. And the bottom portion is where I've gone in and used my current use calculator to say, okay, 2 acres I had, same number. And then instead of having a different residual amount, now I have 8 acres of residual. And I've determined that the grade is pretty similar to what I said for the overall, but in this case, a little bit different, right? On the overall, I had 0.8. I decided that I was going to use a 0.6 on this because perhaps it's some back or wetland or ledgy or something. So it doesn't quite match the overall. So I determined as a standalone parcel that 10 acres of excluded is $101,000. So I'm going to go ahead to my grid and I'm going to put in 101 under my total column and under my homestead column because there was a homestead declared on the property. So therefore all my land is in homestead. I can then put a 0 or just cross out the box for non-homestead there. I'm going to stop right there and make sure everybody's with me.
Not seeing any questions.
Okay, if you feel like I'm going too fast, tell me. Okay, step 2. We need to take our total land and subtract what we've allocated for the excluded land based on statute. So in this case, our total land from our cost sheet, our original cost sheet was $254,800. We're going to subtract what we've allocated according to statute, the excluded land to be, which is $101,000. So that leaves us with a remaining number of $153,800 for our enrolled land. Now here's the leap of faith. You don't see that number anywhere, right? That's because according to statute, we have to value excluded land, and then the mathematical remainder is what's attributed to the enrolled. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put that 153,800 into my grid. So I'm going to put it under enrolled land, on the total, and on the homestead. And then I can either put a little cross out or a 0 in my non-homestead column. Because again, if a homestead's declared, all land is homestead, which is the case in this example. Okay? Anybody lost yet?
They're not telling us.
Speak now. All right, so we have our land done. So if you're one that likes to highlight, you would highlight the land portion on your cost sheet and say, okay, done with that. I'm going to highlight that. I've already allocated for that. Okay, now I need to know what else do I have any other non-homestead use? So I'm going to take my total value minus my homestead. You could, in this case, you could obviously do that visually, but we're doing it mathematically just to show you. So total value is $447,300 on the cost sheet. Homestead is $447,300, which tells me that I have no other non-homestead use. Okay, so I'm going to have nothing in that non-homestead column. So I could go ahead to my grid if I wanted to and put zeros all the way down. Okay, in the non-homestead column. Or I could just put a line through it. That's what I like to do. Okay, so now I have to say, okay, well, what do I have left for value that I haven't allocated? So you could do that visually on your cost sheet. You could say, okay, well, I didn't account for the house yet, right? So I have $177,500 replacement cost, new list depreciation, and I have my site improvements of $15,000. That equals $192,500. Or I could mathematically say, okay, my homestead is $447,300 minus the land I've allocated equals $192,500. Either way, whatever makes more sense for your brain. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to my grid. We know we didn't have anything in enrolled farm buildings, so we zeroed that out. We knew we didn't have anything in non-homestead, so we zeroed out that whole column. And I'm going to enter that $192,500 in my homestead column and in my total column. And then I'm going to add those right up. So I come up to 447,300 and 447,300 for my homestead. I have my cost sheet right next to me, so I'm going to double check. Does that match? And in this case, it does. So I'm good to go forward. I'm going to go ahead and do my use value calculation, which in this case, we said we had 92.2 acres of forest land, which is valued in our example at $151 per acre. So 92.2 times 151 is 13,922. And then I have to multiply my CLA, which in this example was 1.0720. That gives me a use value of 14,925. Rounded to the nearest hundred is 14,900. The beauty is this will be in the program for you, but we like to show people because it's a really good thing to understand how it works. Okay, so you can go ahead and put your use value, which Deanna did in total, and under homestead because that's where my land lives. So my use value is going to follow my land. And then I'm going to go ahead to my taxable. So again, going through this exercise, the dwelling and non-farm is always pays full tax. So 192.5 is going to pay full tax. The excluded land always pays full tax. 101,000 full tax. And then rather than pay on what we said the use value is worth, rather than pay on 153.8, they're going to pay on 14.9. So you can see your little stars there. And those are going to add up to my taxable grand list. 192.5 plus 101, 101,000 plus 14.9 equals 308,400, which is going to be my taxable grand list value. And then we want to know, okay, well, what were the savings for this, folks, or what's the exempt reduction? In this case, we don't have any farm buildings, so there's nothing there. So it's going to be the total enrolled land that we said it was worth, 153.8, minus the use value that they actually pay on, 14.9. So their exempt reduction or benefit is going to be 138,900. That's going to be the number that when we do download to billing, that's going to be brought over into NIMRIC. You're going to receive it in NIMRIC, and it's going to place 138,900 on this parcel as an exemption to lower their taxable grand list for tax billing purposes.
Awesome. Any questions in the chat, Jen?
Will the CLA adjustment this year be the town CLA or the town/statewide CLA?
Town, the one that was certified in January. The other one that's a statewide calculation is only for tax billing purposes. So that's the one with the statewide adjustments, what you'll see on your tax bill. But for this purpose, we use the one that you were actually certified as your CLA, which makes sense because we want to talk about where you're at compared to fair market value, right?
All right. Was that it for chat, Jen?
Yep.
Oh, they're going to let me skate out of this easy today, aren't they? We'll see. We'll keep going.
We're not done yet. All right. So problem number 3, and I apologize. This used to be on document page 35. So running through the same steps that we've done for the last 2 problems, we're going to go ahead and identify the key pieces of information that we need in order to complete the allocation. So in this example, we have a parcel of 35.8 acres that has applied to have 8.73 acres excluded, and they've enrolled 27.07 acres of agricultural land. For this this exercise, we're using a CLA of 1.0427. This parcel is not a homestead parcel at this moment. That might change in the system, not today. And they also have no enrolled farm buildings. So this one looks like it's going to be pretty straightforward. So on your screen, you will see that we have the cost report at the top that gives us what the parcel is valued at and how it is valued for the land. This one also includes site improvements. And at the bottom, we have our current use calculator sample. So again, we have the 35.8 acres up here that's worth 193.8. But our current use calculator, after valuing 2 acres at the same 1.25, and after looking at the 6.72 acres, we determined that the grade of 0.8 is appropriate. The system is telling us based on our land schedule that 7.83 acres is costing out at 121,700, and that is the value of our excluded acres. So if I fast forward here a little bit, we're going to put that number in the grid. In your total column, row 3, your non-home or your homestead column 3 is going to be empty because again, this is not a homestead parcel yet. And then we'll put that number also in of 121.7 in your non-homestead column. Let me rewind here just a bit. Okay, so now that we've found the value of our excluded acreage, and we also know that the total land value that's already assessed on the parcel is 193,800, we're going to reduce that by the excluded value of 121.7 for a result of enrolled value of 72,100. I think I'm going faster than Christy, but it's the third time around, so I think we're okay. If I'm going too fast, let me know. So we'll fast forward again to the grid, put our excluded values back, and then we are going to take that same enrolled number that we just calculated, or found the mathematical remainder for, of 72,100. We're going to put that in the total column, not in the homestead, because again, they haven't filed their homestead deck yet. And then that 72.1 is going to go in the non-homestead column, row 4. All right. So now we need to talk about all of the other value. If you'll remember that there were no enrolled farm buildings on this parcel, so that makes this example a little bit easier. The way that I like to do this math is I take the total value, which is also the non-homestead value in this scenario without a homestead declaration. Total parcel value is 495,100, which you're going to get from the cost report.
459.
You're going, I'm sorry, 459. Am I dyslexic today? That might be true. We are going to remove the land value because we've already allocated for the land, so that we're going to reduce the 459,100 by 193.8 for a excuse me, sorry, for a remaining value of 265,300.
And if you wanted to, sorry about that. If you were a visual person, right, you could say, okay, I have not allocated for replacement cost, new less depreciation, 250,300, and I have not allocated for the site improvements, 15,000. If you add those two together, you're left with 265,300. So that's what you need to allocate for now. Two different ways to do it again.
Yep. As Christy and I both like paper, we both like color. So highlighters, if you're doing this for the first time, if you go through and highlight those on the form, and then you also have that cost report to carry forward to the next year. And so unless something's changed, it's all right there for you. So we'll repopulate the numbers we've already assigned. We know there are no enrolled farm buildings, so we're going to go ahead and zero that whole row right out. And then we're going to plug in that 265.3 that we found in the non-homestead column. Again, no declaration on file. We can go ahead and total up those columns. And again, we're back to the overall parcel value of 459,100. Anything else here, Christy?
Nope.
All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the rest of the grid that again is done mathematically for you in the back of the program, but knowledge is power. So in order to calculate the use value on this parcel, there are 27.07 acres of ag land enrolled using that 2020 value of 382 per acre. We're coming up with 10,341. We're then going to apply that CLA adjustment. The CLA for this example was 1.0427. The result of that equation is 10,782. And again, we round to the nearest hundred. So the number we're going to place in the grid is going to be 10,800. This use value again is for the land only. So we won't have anything in the homestead, and it will all follow where the land is allocated. Oops. Then we have our calculation of what is actually taxable. So we have our 3 stars that have populated. We're taxing at full value the dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings, the excluded land value, and the use value for the enrolled portion. So when we add those 3 numbers together, our taxable grand list is $397,800. And we can populate the grid with those numbers there. And then we are going to do that self-check of the exemption. So the amount of the exemption that will be received on this parcel, no enrolled farm buildings, so there's nothing to consider there. They will receive the difference of the enrolled land of 72,100 minus the use value of 10,800 for an exempt reduction of 61,300. And we'll populate those into the grid. How'd I do, Christy?
Awesome.
Fantastic. I love the positive reinforcement. Any questions, Jen?
The question is, what can you say about the rounding issue from CAMA to VTPIE ProVal, for instance?
I think we have been through several examples of that, Linda. And it's my understanding that it is a ProVal thing, that ProVal is also rounding, which then causes the issue. So I think we got to fix it on the ProVal end, is my understanding from conversations with a couple other towns that have it. But we can certainly have that conversation if you think that's not the correct answer.
While we're on the topic of rounding, all of the examples that we're giving you today have one type of land enrolled, whether that's forest or agricultural. The reality is there are parcels that have multiple types of enrollment. So it's important to know if you're going to do this calculation on your own and you're not getting exactly the same answer, the VTPIE program is doing this use value calculation for each land each land type. So it's going to do this for ag, and it's going to do it for forest and forest or conservation land that's greater than a mile. And that it applies the CLA to each of those individually. So if you're finding that you're coming up with an answer that's a little bit different, you want to make sure that you're calculating those individually and then adding the result of those 2 or 3 different calculations together. That's how you're going to get your answer to match what VTPIE is showing you.
Yep, I think it's a situation in ProVal of rounding at a different place or not rounding at the, at not rounding period. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly, Linda, but I know that we felt like the last time we checked it was a ProVal issue and that perhaps we could fix it there.
Right. I have also seen instances where listers are not putting in valuation or allocation amounts that are rounded to the nearest 100, so that they're having, for example, $121,711 in value. Best practice is to always round anything in your valuation and in your allocation to the nearest 100. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting some rounding in different places that might make the math not match. All right. I think I see. Can you tell me again how you got the value of the excluded land? Gladly. We're going to go back. A lot of back keys. Hold, bear with me. All right. So the value of the excluded land, we utilize the Microsolve current use calculator. The 2-acre value should match your cost report. So 2 acres in this case was graded at 1.5 on the cost report for 81,300. And you'll see that that is the same down here in our current use calculator. There were an additional 6.73 acres of excluded land that after inspection we decided, or consideration, we decided that the 0.8 grade was appropriate. That grade in this example matches the cost report. So when we run that isolated value that's only considering the 8.73 acres separate from the remainder, the economy of scale, that value per acre adjustment for a smaller piece, is telling us that those two together equal 121,700. So now that we value the excluded, that's how we achieve the enrolled land. It's the mathematical difference. Did that answer the question? Or can you say it in a better way, Christy?
I think it did. It looks like you got the thumbs up, but I think the key here is we would want to really look at that map, the current use map, and see what they're excluding, because that's going to hinge on what we apply for a grade. It may be the same as the rest. It may not be. In this case, just for example purposes, we said that it was going to be treated at the 0.8, but it might not. And then the second piece of it that's that leap of faith, right, is that the legislature told us we have to treat this as a standalone parcel. So we might look at this and say, oh, 8 acres at 121,000, but my whole parcel is 193. Yep, that's the eggs. Okay. And that's how you gotta work through it. And then the very last piece is you have to say, okay, could that 8 acres in my town logically sell for 121,700? So because you're doing an independent evaluation at this point on that 8.73 acres.
That really is the key, coming back and doing that self-check with your market. Does this make sense? At the time of my last reappraisal, that these 8.73 acres would have reasonably sold for 121,000 on your grand list.
Yep.
And her
that's
comment is she's got it. Thank you.
Okay, and that's a
Perfect.
different question than I don't like the economy of scale or I don't understand the economy of scale. The question is, does it make sense that this could sell for that? And am I treating that 8 acres like I would another 8 acres that I was assessing?
I feel like we're over explaining this, but just one more piece of information. The key to all of this is that if you're processing current use, you cannot simply take your cost report and divide this value here by this number of acres and then multiply it by the number of acres that you're looking for a value for. Because by doing that, you're giving it the economy of scale. You're considering the whole dozen of the
Yes.
eggs instead of just the 3.
And most importantly, you're assessing contrary to statute if you do that.
Someone said more is good, and they obviously don't know how much I like to chat. So, but all right. So if in your offices, if you're a new lister and you run across cost reports and for current use purposes that are doing that math, that are just taking this number here and dividing it by the number that you're trying to, or the number of acres, and doing that multiplication, that is contrary to statute. So it's a prime opportunity for us to rerun those current use calculators and get it right for 2025. And again, your district advisor, your DA is happy to help you with that process.
Yep. Love it.
We do. This is the fun part.
All right, so I
All right.
have another one. It
Okay, I'm just going to
says,
repopulate.
would it be enough reason for a homeowner to litigate because of the rounding of differences in systems? How significant is the issue? It's usually by cents.
Yeah,
So-
at the end of the day, it's going to be cents, and I would tell you that anybody can litigate over anything, right? But I never tell you somebody can't litigate over something, but would they be able to defend with the market the difference between $100? I don't think so.
Mhm.
If it were up to me, all assessments would be rounded to the nearest 1,000, and the bigger the value, maybe 10,000. We're just not that good. Nobody is.
Yeah, I think
And-
the largest example that I saw last year when I was doing VTPIE review and testing was, and we're talking about on a $3 million parcel. I think the difference was about $300 of value. So if you're talking about on a tax rate, that would be $3 grand list dollars times the tax rate. We're talking about $7 on the tax bill. It's not significant. But if they want to spend a lot of money on an attorney for $7, yeah.
So we have one where it said, two more now. If there are multiple pieces of excluded land, are they valued as single pieces or multiple pieces?
The way that this legislation reads is a standalone parcel. So unless you charged on your primary cost sheet for an additional site, then it's all going to be considered one, all the excluded land, right? So in this example, if that extra 6.73 acres was on a different portion of the parcel, it's still going to be backland to the first piece, unless you had charged a 2-acre site originally, right? That's where we got to look at our cost sheet. But in terms of the statute, it says a standalone parcel, not several standalone parcels, right? So we're interpreting it to be, it would be backlanded, treated all as one, mathematically.
Sorry, I'm talking here, and I do see that there was a comment about the rounding notation here,
Oh, yeah.
round up to. Yep.
I was just
so in this-
reading it. I was reading it,
So-
but I was muted.
Yes, so I should edit this slide to just say round to, and you'll see that the next example actually says round up to, and we're going to round down. So again, if we were in class, you would get a prize.
And
Thank you for
50
helping
is
us make it
rounding
better.
down. 50 is rounding down.
Right. Once
Um,
you would have to reach 51, I believe, in order for the system to round up.
Okay, and Linda's saying once it's in numeric, it can work out.
Yeah.
So speaking of litigation, do you know if a lister is covered for liability on town's insurance?
I would speak with your town select board and ask the question of your insurance agent. I would imagine that problem or that question might also vary.
Linda Sherman is saying yes, but I think it might be individual.
You never know.
That's it.
Never assume. All right, Christy, do you want to take problem number 4?
Sure. Everybody ready? Okay, so first we need to gather the information that we need. In this parcel, we have a total parcel acreage of 25.22 acres. We're going to check that with our cost sheet, make sure that's the same. We have enrolled 23.22 acres of agricultural land, and we have excluded acres of 2 acres. Okay. And then we also need to know, what's the next item, Deanna?
Oh, sorry, I hit the mute button
I'm
instead of
waiting
the
for your
forward
prompt.
button.
we also need to know what the CLA is. The current CLA, we kind of gave you a trick one here. In this example is 1.0720. Yours won't be different from parcel to parcel, but we did that to you for example purposes, just to keep you thinking. Okay, so 10720. And then there is no homestead declared on this property currently. And there are also no enrolled farm buildings. So these are the kind we like because it's going to be pretty simple, right? We say, yay, this one's going to be quick and easy. So the first thing we're going to do is say, what is my excluded land? We look at the current use map, always looking at that map to verify that the excluded 2 acres is what we have for our assigned site 2 acres. It is, so we have it right on our cost sheet. That makes it easy. Our excluded land value is $52,000. So we're going to go ahead and go to our grid. And we're going to put in $52,000 under excluded land. And we're going to put it in the non-homestead column because we said there was no homestead declared on this property. Okay, next step is our enrolled land. So we need to take our total land value, $116,500, minus what we've allocated according to statute for the excluded land, $52,000, which leaves us with a mathematical remainder of $64,500. And yes, it's an easy calculation when you have the 2 acre exclusion. So we're going to go ahead and put our $64,500 in the total column under land, enrolled land, and also in the non-homestead column under enrolled land. Okay. Next task is going to be, we need to see what we have left to allocate. So we could either visually say, okay, well, I know I don't have any enrolled farm buildings. What else do I have? I could look at my cost sheet and say, well, the only thing that I have left is some buildings at $16,300. Or I could mathematically say, what is my total? $132,800 minus what I've allocated for already, $116,500 in land, and I have 0 farm buildings. So the mathematical result is $16,300 that I have to allocate for. So I'm going to go ahead over to my grid. And I know I have 0 farm buildings, and I'm going to go ahead and put $16,300 in my non-homestead column for dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings. And then I can also put it right in the total column there. Now I've got all my numbers. I can go ahead and add those up for each column. And I get $132,800, which should and does match my cost sheet total. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my use value. In this example, I had 23.2 acres of agricultural land, which for our example purposes was valued at $382 per acre as use value. That gives me $8,870. I have a CLA adjustment of 1.0720 in this example for a use value of $9,509, which is rounded to $9,500. I'll then go ahead and put that in my use value, and it will go in my non-homestead column because that's where my land is. And then I'm going to go ahead and calculate my taxable grand list. So all dwellings and non-enrolled farm buildings are taxable. All excluded land is taxable. And then on enrolled land, we're going to pay on use value rather than the assessment assigned. So I've got 16,300 plus 52,000 plus 9,500 to give me a taxable grand list of 77,800. And that's going to go in my total column, and it will also go in my non-homestead column in this example. And then I want to know what's their exempt reduction or savings. I don't have any farm buildings. If I did, those would be part of the exemption piece. In this example, I would take my enrolled land value that I assigned minus what they're paying on, so 64.5 minus the use value they're going to pay on at 9,500 gives them an exemption of $55,000. So that's going to go in my total column and also in my non-homestead column. And that's also the number that's going to be downloaded when I click download to billing. It will be downloaded to NIMRIC. I'll go to NIMRIC and pick it up, and it will place $55,000 as an exemption on this parcel in my NIMRIC grand list for billing.
All right. So I think there's just some chat about litigation and liability. Thank you, Linda S, for saying, I think it was Linda S, saying, or Pam S, saying the state holds harmless elected officials in the conduct of their duties. They cannot be sued individually. Thank you for
Good
that.
to know. Good to know.
I feel like I did know that at some point, but my brain is tuned to current use right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we could discuss that at a different class.
Yep.
New listers or something.
Sounds like a good one for Jim Knapp during statutes and
Oh, love
exemptions,
it.
maybe.
Yeah, love it.
Perfect one.
All right, and then last but not least, we have a more complex problem, number 5. So if I miss anything here, Christy, you jump right in. But we're going to gather the pieces and parts that we need to do the allocation. Oh, I have a rogue arrow up here. Okay. So we have a total parcels. Acres is 60 acres. And then we have excluded acres are 7 according to their application. And we have 53 enrolled forest less than a mile acres. We have a CLA of 1.0427. We do have a homestead declaration that's been received on this parcel. And we have no enrolled farm buildings. So maybe not any more difficult than the last one. All right. So again, we have the SNP of the cost report that you have there in front of you, as well as the current use calculator from the NEMRIC Microsoft product. And we have 7 excluded acres. So again, we're using that calculator in determining the value of 2 acres at 1.0 is 65,000. Again, that matches your cost report. And then we've looked at the 5 acres, either on the map or whatever means necessary, and determined that a 0.08 grade that is on the parcel is still reasonable and relevant for this this additional 5 acres. So adding those two together, we come up with $95,000. Gonna fast forward to here. So we're gonna put that in your grid, in your excluded land row, in the total column, as well as the homestead column, because there is a declaration on file. All right. From there, we're going to find the value of the enrolled land. So we're going to take the total land value that you can find on your cost report of $266,100. We are going to minus the $95,000 for the excluded land that we've just found, and the mathematical remainder is $171,100. That equals your enrolled land. So we're going to fast forward here, and we're going to place that number in the enrolled land row number 4 in your total and your homestead column. All right. So now we are going to allocate for buildings. There are no enrolled farm buildings on this parcel. And if you really wanted to do the math, you could take the total value of the parcel of $461,400 found here, subtract the homestead value of $461,400, and you're going to have a mathematical remainder of 0. Most people will just take it right from their cost report, but if you wanted to do the math, that's how you would set it up on your sheet. And then we have dwellings and non-enrolled farm building. These will be homestead. So we have a homestead value of $461,400 on the parcel, and we have a land value of 266,100, which means the value allocated for, or the value of the buildings on the parcel are 373,300. Again, Christy would take her highlighter to the sheet and she would see what is left to add up, and she would do it that way. Anything else here, Christy?
Nope.
All right. Let's repopulate what we've done so far. We'll throw in the zeros because we have no enrolled buildings. We had no remaining non-homestead value. So we're going to put that 375,3 in the homestead column and the total column. Then we will go ahead and add up those columns. Again, your system does this for you. All right. So let's move on to calculating the use value for the 53 acres that are enrolled. So we're going to multiply the 53 by 151 for forest value per acre according to the current use board. That result is $8,003. We will adjust that by the CLA of 1.0427 for a result of 8,344. And this was my error here. You'll see I said round up. We're obviously rounding down to 83,000 and 8,300. And so you can populate your grid in front of you with 8,300 in the total column as well as the homestead column, because again, the use value goes with the land. Now we'll talk about which pieces on this sheet are taxable. So again, dwellings and non-enrolled are taxable. Excluded land is fully taxable. And instead of paying on the enrolled actual value, we're only going to pay on the 8,300. So if we add all of those numbers together, our taxable grand list value is 478,600. We'll go ahead and populate that in here. And then we'll talk about what is the amount of the exemption that they will receive on their tax bill. So they have no enrolled farm buildings. They will not receive a value or an exempt value for that. And then we're going to consider the full enrolled value of 171,100 minus the use value, what they're actually going to pay on, of 8,300. So the total of their exemption is going to be the difference, which is 162,800. All right, so that is all we have for problems. Do we have any questions?
There are no questions.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I have to get to a different slideshow.
Any questions on this, folks? They're either asleep or they get it. I'm not sure. Hard to tell on the screen.
A few of you want to say they got it? Getting better at it. Clapped hands. We're awake. Following.
Okay.
Got it. Got
If you
it.
mean I'm getting better at it, thank you very much. Because Christy's been doing this a little longer. She's mastered it.
Thank you for answering.
And again, don't panic. If you don't get it still, we can work through them with you. And we can always work through the hard ones with you. If you get stuck, sometimes just a fresh set of eyes will help find that missing $1,200 or whatever it is, you know?
Brenda said she got all the homework correct.
Yay.
Can you do a dwelling or non-enrolled buildings again?
You mean in that last example?
She didn't specify. Can you do the dwelling and non-enrolled, yes, buildings?
Let's go back to problem 1 because it actually did have some numbers there that we can work with. Christy, do you want to walk through the enrolled farm and non-enrolled? Yep. I'll make sure we get to the right. Okay. I'll go ahead and present again.
What am I being asked?
We're being asked to go over the calculation for the dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings. Just a little slower.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways you could do it. You
Oh,
can do
wait.
pennant. Oh, okay.
She's specifically asking for the last problem. Okay. hold
Oh,
on.
okay. All right. All right.
There you go.
Okay. So when we get to the dwelling and non-farm, we know we didn't have any enrolled farm buildings, so we have no non-homestead, right? Because also our homestead and our total are the same. So we have no non-homestead. So if we were to take our homestead value at 641,400 and subtract our land that we've allocated for at 266,100, then we know that we have left to allocate 375,300. And you could also, if you like to do it on pen and paper better, you could say, okay, what have I not allocated for? I allocated for my land, so I could highlight that section, but I didn't allocate for the house, the replacement cost new less depreciation, 345,800. I didn't allocate for the site improvements at 15,000, and I didn't allocate for that equipment shed at 14,500. So I could add those three up if I want to do it that way. And it still should add up to 375,300. So you can either back your way in the way that we're doing, or you can isolate it on the cost sheet and see what you have left. Whatever works better for your brain.
Did that help? Oh, good, good. Thank you.
53 acres of, I believe it was forest land. Is that correct, Deanna?
That is, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the forest land on our examples was $151 per acre. So 53 times 151 is 8,003. And then we had a CLA in this example of 1.0427. So we multiplied that by the 8,003, and it gives us 8,344, which is then rounded to the nearest hundred at $8,300.
All right. Does that catch us up with the questions, Terry?
Evan has a question, and you can unmute yourself, Evan, and ask.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my chat is not loading, and I have a question that I emailed to Christy. If she could read it or look at it, that'd be great. Thanks. That's it.
Did you want to just ask it? Evan?
Well, if she could read, it's pretty complicated, so I think it's best that
Okay.
she read it, if that's possible, please.
I think I have it. If there are 10 farm buildings but only 8 enrolled, how do we figure out which 8 are enrolled? Am I looking at the right question?
No, this is Evan from Marlboro.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thought it was
job.
Kevin from Clarendon.
No.
Marlboro, sorry. My bad.
I mean, I can go ahead.
I got it now. Parcel with original 3.5 acres surrounding the house were excluded for many years. New owner adds 0.5 acres to the original 3.5 acres, making it 4 acres excluded surrounding the house, which is located at the end of a private drive with 2 other dwellings. Also created a new excluded area of 1.25 that is a log landing with direct access on Potter Hill Road. How do you value the 0.5 and the 1.25 acres standalone and highest and best use? So my question goes back to your cost sheet, Evan. Do you have those on your original cost sheet valued as separate sites?
No, it was just added. I mean, they just pulled that 1.25 acres out and said this log landing we're pulling out. It was never its own site or anything.
Right. So therefore, then you can't allocate it as a separate site. So
Okay.
you would treat those as back acreage. Whether or not you think they each have a different grade is fine. You could do 2 acres other, right? And do
Right.
2 different grades if you wanted to, but it's all going to go into that volume discount still.
Okay. All is one. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Unless you, right, if they have, where you said they have a couple of houses, if you had 2 sites on those, then you could certainly charge for those in the excluded because you charged for those on your main cost sheet.
Right. They're other owners, so other properties.
Okay,
But that makes
gotcha.
sense. That makes
But-
sense. Thank you.
In other words, don't allocate for something that you didn't charge for in the beginning.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep.
So we have a question. What happens if you have more than one type of enrolled land, agricultural and forest?
So you do each calculation. So let's say I have 50 acres of ag. I'm going to multiply that by the ag price. And then I have 50 acres of forest. I'm going to multiply that by the forest price. And then I'm going to take the total of those two and I'm going to apply the CLA. And that should be my use value. And you might have several. A lot of parcels have several.
I would like to hear an answer to the first question Christy read
Oh, from the wrong email? Sure. I got to read it again, though, so I remember what it was.
While you're looking for that, Christy, I just want to remind people that if you do the math, if you say in this example, you have 23.22 acres of ag land, and then you have another 10 acres of, or say 25 acres of forest land, the system is going to apply the CLA to each of those numbers individually and then add them together. So because they will be rounded at each points of those calculation in the VTPIE program, your answer might be a little bit different if you do the math individually as we've done here.
Oh, okay. Good clarification. So the question was, if there are 10 farm buildings, but only 8 are enrolled, how do we figure out which 8 are enrolled? So it's a great question because this is real life scenario, right? I think there's a couple of ways. One, that might be a case where you need to go to the actual site and talk with the farmer, right? And say, what are we talking about for buildings here? What do you got for buildings here? You can also drive by and say, are there, and you can look on your cost sheet, are there sheds that aren't related to the farm? Are there detached garages that aren't related to the farm? Could those in fact be my non-enrolled pieces? Or is it simply that I'm calling it 10 on my cost sheet and the farmer's calling it 8 because of the way that I delineate each piece of a building? So there isn't a super simple answer. You got to dig in if it's really confusing, and you might have to take a drive by, or you might even have to pull in the yard and have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think Michael confirmed yesterday that the new current use maps that we've been getting of late actually do label the structures. so that when they have a list of what is enrolled, that there will be a label or some other identifier on those buildings to identify which one is which in their point of view. Is that correct, Michael?
That is correct.
Okay. So we're making improvements all the time.
Trying to.
Trying
That's all we
to.
can do.
Okay,
All right,
did you find
that's
the, okay, that's it for questions.
okay. I was getting a little bit traumatized by going back and forth here, so I just wanted to wait until we were done. If there weren't so many fly-ins, it would be a little bit easier. All right. So now that we have gone through all of the fun of all of the math and the highlighting and, the eraser and the pencil in our offices, like I'm sure we're all going to do as soon as we get back to our offices and they're available, right? Once we're done with that process, the next most important piece is to make sure that we download the work that we've done into our billing program from I'd say 99% of you, that's the NEMRIC program, right? Because we want to get it into the system so that it's reflected on the tax bill, but we also want to make sure that it's showing up on the 411 so that we can identify where those values are coming in and affecting taxability and our overall grand list. We will show you this when we demo. Anything here, Christy?
This is one of the most important parts that we've found people have forgotten. They've done all the work, but then sometimes they've forgotten the download to billing piece, which means that you're not pushing those exemptions over into your billing. So it's super important. Anytime you work on it and complete it, go ahead and click download to billing and then go into NIMRIC, right? Because we're batting that ball back and forth. Go into NIMRIC and receive it.
The initial review that you do in the VTPIE program will not allow you to do this download to billing feature until you have verified every parcel that is available for you.
That is correct.
Subsequent downloads will allow you to do piecemeal if you need to, but it will tell you information for parcel span number X will not be communicated. So keep that in mind. Anything else to add there about that particular nuance?
Nope. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Okay. Once we have gotten to the point of noticing taxpayers, their current use allocation, just like their change of appraisal notices, any change to their value or their homestead or non-homestead value is grievable. So you are required to notify a taxpayer under normal grievance procedure each year if you change the total listed value. However, because you're required to publicly post your grievance dates for each year, any taxpayer may grieve in any year, with the exception of those who have a state board or a court decision and value that's set for 3 years, unless their property is changed. Anything here, Christy?
Nope.
All right, so I covered this on the last slide. I apologize. So again, we have that change of assessment or change of appraisal notice that's sent out. So then we also have the notice to taxpayer of use value allocation. These are required to go out if at any point your allocations have changed. It is my opinion, I'm not going to speak for all DAs, but I'll let Christy chime in after, that these notice of use value allocations should be sent out every year. The reason being that the exemption changes because that use value per acre is going to change. And it's just a way to let folks know what to expect on their tax bill. We don't want them to be surprised when they get to the tax bill piece, because then their ability to grieve or ask questions is limited. Christy?
I agree, and my preference would always be to send them to everybody because I want full disclosure, and I want people to know what their tax bill is going to be based off of. And if you don't, what you're going to get is complaints when the bill goes out. You might get complaints anyway, because that's human nature, right? But if you can have full disclosure ahead of time of what that bill is going to be based off of, I think it just makes a whole lot more sense. So for me, I would send all of them out every year.
Absolutely. And if once you get your taxpayers used to receiving these notifications every year, then it'll kind of even itself out, right? We want to be transparent, we want to be fair, we want to be equitable.
Yep.
Also, please note in the VTPIE program, if you're going to be running results of your current use grievance hearings out of the program, you must run all of these values. So this is a process that's required by statute. You must issue notice when there's a change. So we want to make sure you're issuing a notice for everyone to make your lives easier on the other end.
So I have a pertinent question. Is there a required change to mail if only the use value has been changed?
No, you don't have to if only the use value has changed.
Or the CLA for the town?
Correct. You do not have to send notices to those for that purpose. Do we think you should? Yes. Are you statutorily required to? No. Only if
And
you've changed an allocation or a value.
are current use landowners informed of the changes to the use value by the state?
They are. So they get a letter telling them what the use values are. But that doesn't tell them what the implication of that is on their tax bill, right? Unless they understood all this math and could do that on their own, which I would venture to guess very, very, very few do. They're only going to get what the use values are each year.
And
correct
on the
me if-
back of their notice, if you look on the back of their notice, they have the explanation of how each line works.
Yes.
If you print this back on back.
Yep.
And
Michael
also,
was gonna-
how do they grieve those figures? And is it up to the listers only, or does someone come from current use to help with the grievance?
So hold on just a minute, Terry, because I think Michael wanted to say something on that last one.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, they should just be grieving the fair market value that was placed on the land to the assessing official. And then in a case that the town does get a grievance, a current use specialist or staff member wouldn't be present there.
Would not.
Would not, correct.
Would not. Yes. So yes, this is your value to defend, and that's why we talk about really doing that gut check when you're doing excluded land calculation, because you are doing an appraisal, you're doing an opinion of value on what that excluded land is as a standalone parcel. And that's the piece that you could need to defend, right? So you want to make sure that you're being consistent, fair, and logical with the market.
Christy and Deanna, I might just add too, in VTPIE, there is some ability for you to add your own verbiage in addition to the statutory verbiage that's in there. So if you felt like you had an explanation in terms of like why they're receiving this notice, or something that was a little more simplified that you felt like was straightforward, you certainly could add that to your notice that you were mailing to people.
Absolutely. There is a question about how to grieve, and we're going to talk about the grievance process in just a moment. So
if
where do I
you're
wanna go with this?
valuing, if it says if you're valuing standalone, need to have the zoning in there as well?
Correct. Correct. You would want to consider that, certainly. Yes. As with all assessment.
Okay, that's it for now.
Yep. And hopefully you've already taken that into consideration when you valued the overall property as well.
Mhm.
So during your initial grievance period, these two items, the total value and allocation, can be heard at the time and notices will be sent out at the same time. We say they will be sent out at the same time. That's ideal. Why is that ideal? That is because you don't want to have to schedule two different bulk or grievance hearings. You will then have to be in your office staffing with all three of your listers or whatever your composition is for two separate hearing processes. If you get these notices out around the same time as your change of appraisal notices, then you only have to have one hearing period. And that will simplify your lives a lot. Then you can also be talking about those two things at the same time. You can be talking about the total value and the allocation with the taxpayers. They are considered two separate things because, again, the overall total value or that allocation does not affect the total value. Anything there, Christy?
Yeah, just reiterating what you said, it makes no sense to have a conversation with somebody about their allocation without having a conversation with them about their value. They're so intertwined, right? So it makes sense that we would want to talk about those two things at the same time. Also, people don't necessarily understand one versus the other. So if you can have one grievance where we're talking about total value and we're talking about allocation, then it makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, if there are subsequent changes to that parcel, say in October or September, because something has happened or current use has processed an application, that moment in time also, if there's a change, requires a new change of allocation notice to be sent because they have that same statutory due process for appeal of the allocation, not their overall value.
Yeah.
I think we have some things going on in the chat, Terry.
Terry?
I'm reading away. The first one was, are these sent by certificate of mailing? And I said yes, because you always want to be able to prove that you mailed it.
Yep.
And the next one was, that's different from withdrawn acres. Yes, question mark.
What's different?
I think from what you had just talked about.
I'm gonna say a lot of things are different with withdrawn, including the answer to Evan's question from earlier. I was answering the question only with regard to allocation. Withdrawal is completely separate under a separate statute, so let's not confuse the two.
Yep. And if we have time, we'll talk about that withdrawal process as well. But as far as the appeal or the grievance piece, there is the same statutory grievance due process there. They still get the 14 days to do that. Again, totally separate from allocation and their actual value.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't think this was the next slide. Otherwise, I would have answered that question. All of these allocation notices should be sent by certificate of mailing. Anything to add here about certificate of mailing, Christy?
Nope.
And we have one more question. In different cases, defending the allocation values, how firm and stand your ground listers assessors allowed and don't give in to the threat to file a lawsuit. Reasonable stand your ground. Reasonably. In a difficult case, defending on allocation of value. How tough should the listers be? Is pretty much what you're asking.
I think it depends how confident you are in your value, but I would certainly not want to keep caving every time someone was threatening a lawsuit because there are certain individuals that might just do that as a matter of course.
They still get to go to BCA
Mm-hmm.
on the allocation and to the state.
And I think that's just an overall statement of how confident are you in the value that you've assessed or applied, especially in relation to what you've done with other parcels, because we know that the further you get away from reappraisal, the harder it is to estimate that fair market value, right? The key is to be equitable. And if you can defend your position, that's what matters. If you can't, if they bring you good information that says that 10 acres that's excluded is actually swamp and you didn't know, and you currently have a grade on that extra 8 or whatever acres of a 0.8, maybe it should be a 0.6. Maybe you should go take a look at it. But it's good to take in new information. You just need to be consistent.
So
Okay.
it said, yesterday it was implied that withdrawal notices didn't need a certificate of mailing.
We didn't talk about withdrawal notices yesterday. It may have come up in conversation, but it wasn't part of the presentation. So hopefully we'll get there today. I will say that anytime you send an official notice that has a due process attached to it, it is in your best interest to make sure that you have proof of mailing, whether that's a certificate of mailing or paying for certified mail, which is a little bit more expensive. You should be able to substantiate that you have met your requirement and you've given them the full 14 days to grieve to you.
Yep, agreed.
All right. So this should look pretty familiar to you based on all of the fun problems that we did. What you're seeing on your screen now is a snip from the actual notice to taxpayer of use value allocation that will come out of the VTPIE program when you run these notices. Christy?
I got nothing here.
You got nothing. Okay.
Nope.
So I apologize. I forgot to change the year here. What you're seeing at the top is what was existing in the program as of last year and noticed. So when we said earlier that it is best practice to run all of your notices, even though you only have to mail some of them, this is why. This box at the top is only going to be populated with information that the bottom box can be compared to if you have actually gone through the process of running those. We are going to have a separate training with Pat Santoso. I don't know if we've set a date for that yet, but it will certainly be advertised. I think we're actually going to do 2 of them because this piece is important. We want to make sure that we true up what we did last year so we can have the correct comparison this year.
March 27th and May 13th.
Perfect. Thank you. So if you want to jot that down, I can't remember the time of day, but they will be one of those, I think, 3-hour webinars so that we can go through all of a demo of VTPIE, use value allocation notices, and even the results of grievance process. So again, on your notice, what you're seeing at the top is what it was, and at the bottom, we're seeing what it is now. So this is how your taxpayers are going to be able to look and see what has changed. So if they have those questions, most often, as we've mentioned, the only thing that really changes is this use value, which drives these bottom 2 rows. So they will be able to clearly identify that nothing has changed in their value. You didn't change any numbers. And what changed is just because of the use value in the CLA. And as Terry mentioned before, what we're seeing now is what we're calling the backer. If you have a duplex printer, we hope you use it and print these on the back of all of your allocation notice forms, because this is kind of a self-help tool to help the taxpayer identify what's happening in each of those lines and how you got to where you did. And it's essentially explaining all of the processes that we went through in the problem, or problems, plural. Anything to add here, Christy?
Somebody's saying the presentation's not on the screen, but I'm seeing it.
I see it. Maybe you need to log off and log back in real quick.
The backer will automatically print. And I think it's super important because it really does get to that taxability piece. And if you look through it now that you've taken this class, it will and should make a lot more sense to you. It's exactly what we've done. Takes them through the taxability math, how you get to the taxable piece, how you get to the exemption piece.
All right.
Somebody else is not seeing it either. Makes no sense to me. I'm seeing it. I don't know. Huh.
Oh, somebody said they're seeing it now, so I apologize to those who might not be able to see it, but I think that most are. So we are recording this and it will be available. Again, this PowerPoint presentation follows page by page in your document. So even though you might not be able to see what we're looking at, you should be able to have it in front of you in your document.
Yep.
All right. This appeal rights is a little bit out of place. We're going to skip that one. We're going to talk about hold harmless real quick. How does the loss in value or tax for current use get accounted for? Who pays for the loss in the grand list? In short, the state of Vermont provides an annual payment to the municipalities to limit the increase on the municipal tax rate due to current use exemptions, and that is pursuant to Title 32 VSA 3760, which is also available in its full text at the back of your document. Anything here about hold harmless, Christy?
So in short, the towns are getting paid for what they lost on their municipal tax because of current use. The education tax that was lost is funded by all of Vermont taxpayers because it comes out of the whole education pool or money before the rates are set. So we're all funding current use equally. So when I hear people say, well, I'm in a town and people say, well, our town's getting hammered by current use because we got 3 more and we already have 30. That's actually not true because we're all funding it equally. If your argument is that we're losing a lot of money over current use, then it's a statewide loss as opposed to an individual loss within your town because you get reimbursed for the municipal piece and we all fund the education piece.
All right. I think I see some activity in the chat, Terry. And you're muted.
See, everything is fine. Okay. Side note, where would we find our total acres enrolled in current use for our towns specifically? I'm not sure if they mean the whole town or individuals. Maybe the
So
whole town?
I think what they're asking for is a report to just so that they can see how many acres in their whole town are enrolled. So total ag acres, total forest, total forest more than or greater than a mile from that class 1 to 3 range. Is that what you're looking for? I'm going to say unknown user because I don't see a name. Okay.
Yes.
Michael, is that
Like-
something that exists?
Well, yes and no. So we do have a statewide report that we put out every year, but we're working out some. We're working to verify some data with VTPIE before we release that data for 2025, and then it'll be accessible to towns and landowners.
So
Did that
then
answer the question? Did that answer the question?
I think so. And what I'm hearing is, we're trying to improve as best we can. Forward motion.
Linda said she was able to pull the report from VTPIE.
Then maybe she can.
Yeah.
So you can pull parcel reports, you can pull all of them and do the math that way. If there is another report, it must be one of those hidden things that we haven't talked about. So we'll certainly follow up with VTPIE and see if that's something that we can advertise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do.
You can
Pat,
download.
go ahead.
I'm
Terry.
sorry. You can download it in Excel, and then if you're proficient in Excel, you can play with that.
Right. So
Yeah,
when you do that,
admittingly, I'm nowhere near an expert on VTPIE from the town's point of view, but Pat did I remember Pat, our VTPIE rep, showed us a pull down bar where it looked like the town could maybe download kind of bulk data like that.
Sure. I do know that when you download to billing, there is a column in that export that does have acres, but it's not going to differentiate between agricultural, forest, or forest greater than a mile. So if you're looking for that type of minutia, it's not going to be on that download to billing, but it may very well exist somewhere else that we just haven't been using just yet. Okay, we'll check it out. Thank you.
So
Hey,
can you discuss?
One more
Oh, go
thing,
ahead, Mike.
sorry, Terry. It looks
That's
like
fine.
Ken, who's one of our special, he's special too, but he's one of our specialists, and he's shared a link to some data that might be helpful in the chat.
So can you discuss how the members of the BCA will be educated handling appeals of the current use from the listers?
I think that's a loaded question. We would hope that our BCA takes it upon themselves to seek out the information. As far as BCA and appeal hearings in general, particularly around the time of reappraisal, PVR contracts with VLCT to co-sponsor education opportunities that actually go to those towns that are reappraising. We know that first off, people weren't reappraising as often as they probably needed to, and there's always overturn on the board. VLCT has some great resources in their municipal area for general assessment appraisals. I'm sorry, appeals. I don't know that there's anything specific to current use allocation. Do you, Christy?
I don't.
Okay. I personally would be interested or able to talk to my town's BCAs if they ask the question. But I think it's going to be one of those situations where we don't know what they know until someone reaches out. And I think most of our DAs, district advisors, would be able to have that conversation or tag one of us in that would be comfortable with that.
So I think when you talk to BCA, and this is a general message, we want to inform them of the parcel, but not make them assessment experts. They're supposed to be hearing the evidence that you present and others present and deciding accordingly. And there's a value in that. So we don't want them to be assessment experts. We want to educate them in the parcel and how it relates to the market. And I think the same is going to be when we talk about current use. We want to say, okay, this parcel also involves current use. As part of this, there's a required breakdown. This is what I did. This is the statute behind it. And as part of this decision, we need to also talk about this breakdown. So I think it's incumbent upon you to have that conversation and be able to have that conversation for the BCA when these parcels are brought up, which is why this training is so important.
Okay, so next question is, does hold harmless payments to town equal the townwide total exempt reduction times the municipal tax rate?
It's very similar, but it's also a year in arrears. So I would have to defer to Chloe Wexler for that because she does the calculations for it.
Right, and it would include all municipal tax rates. So if your town has voted exemptions where the town carries the liability for the education piece or veterans exemptions, for example, most of us have those. That local agreement rate would also be reimbursed to the town. So if your town separates your municipal budget into town highway, fire, water, all of those different parts and pieces, if it's a municipal rate, your town is being reimbursed for that. You see, I can zoom in here without losing too much information. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. And because we are in the test environment here, I'm going to be working in 2024. So please don't do that when you get back to your office. You want to make sure that this drop down here when you sign in is in your 2025 year. Okay. So hopefully this looks familiar to most of you. For the new folks, this is probably the first time or one of the first few times that you've seen this system. This is VTPIE, and this is where we or you as listers do the majority of your work when it pertains to homestead declarations, current use. We now have some exemption features in this program, as well as exchanging your information with VTPIE. I'm going to forgo going through the upload process because that takes some time, and we do have some good separate documentation and recordings on that. I'm going to focus just on the tax programs, if that works for you, Christy.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So just as the presentation showed before and your documentation shows, we're going to click on tax programs. Actually, I'm going to go back here for just a moment. So at the top of your screen, as you go into menus, you'll see that you'll have blue hyperlinks that happen at the top of your screen. Those are just quick access to get back to the step before. The reason I'm going back is I did want to point out here that each process that we have in the VTPIE program is going to tell you if you have something to do. So in this particular sample town or test town, this is telling us that the local users, the listers and assessors, have verified 94 out of 99 records. So that means we still have some fun to do. So let's see, we'll click back here. And again, we have homesteads, we have exemptions and current use. For today, we're going to focus on current use. And again, we have that same breakdown here, a little bit more detail, saying that we have all 99 have been locally reviewed or had their initial review with the current use staff. And again, 94 out of 99 have been locally verified. And that 90 of them are state certified. And I'll explain that to you a little bit more as we go through this process. So once we click on that current use, let's see, all right, it'll populate our work list. So for today we have 5. We're not going to go through all 5. They're just there in case we need some examples. You'll notice here in the left-hand column, we have 4 yeses and 1 no. These no's cause a lot of concern at the local level, because if you click on them, you will see there's very little that you can do here. This is just for informational purposes, and there's no verify button for you to work on. Okay, we are going to acknowledge that they're there. We're going to know why they're there. They're going to download a 0 exemption into your billing program when we get to that point. But for this point in time, I know we're going to get the question, why do they have to be there? Just because we also don't want to see them there, but that's the way the system is functioning. Okay. Maybe the current use staff could give us a better reason why they're there, but I think at this point that we just have to accept that the no's are going to be there, and we're going to just verify and focus on the ones that say yes. Okay.
And Deanna, sorry to interrupt, but those no, like if somebody else, if Peter sold this property to somebody else who then applied, it's going to show no for Peter. So you might have multiple for one span, I guess. The one
Sure.
might say yes and one might say no.
That's fair. So what Jen is saying here is that if you notice that there is a no here, I would recommend that you go to show all, because it'll bring up every single parcel, and then you sort by the span number, and you'll see that this span number likely exists 2 times in the event of a transfer. So that might have been a little confusing. Give us a call if you have any questions when you see those no's in your list. All right, so let's hop into an actual record here. So this should look familiar to you based on what we were doing in class. What we want to pay attention to here, when we first log in, we want to make sure again that that's the grand list owner reasonably matches the PVR owner. Okay, so we have an LLP and we have an LLP2, probably just a matter of how they typed it in their deed versus how they put it on their application. If you're worried about it, it does not hurt to ask current use, or at least make it known. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. The other piece that we want you to just double check, we want to make sure that you are allocating the correct parcel and are in agreement with current use. Sometimes the current use span number will be different because it may be a situation of a subdivision. So we want to reconcile those two things. Make sure that we're allocating the correct parcel to the correct application. This is a process that we can do ourselves. We do not have to wait for current use staff to change the span number for us. Before I show them how to change the property, Christy, is there anything else you want to say about spans and names?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So as Christy mentioned, when we click this button, it actually brings us out to the GIS maps. And I think that I have my password in here, so let's see. So I find this to be a helpful tool because it's going to bring me right out to the parcel that I am allocating for. So I can get a visual on it. And it has some great details. So you can see that it looks like most of this parcel is ag, if not all. Okay. All right, so back here on this page, if this span number were wrong, if you wanted to change this, say it was just a typo and it was a 5 or a 408. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the property tab here and we're going to add a property. And we can search by the address of the property, the span number. I prefer to use the last 5. You can type the whole thing in if you would like, or the owner's name. So if the owner owns multiple parcels and you forgot to write down the span, you can type in, let's see, we were looking for Barnes. The Barnes family has 3 parcels, so we'll want to identify which one should have actually been attached to the property. Okay. When you do that, only one property can be attached to that parcel. I'm not going to do that at this time because I don't want to mess up the application we're working on. That new linked parcel will show here. And when you get back to the application tab, this grand list box is now going to reflect whatever that new span is that was attached, including any change to owner name, acreage, value, etc. Okay. Sometimes when you're in this program, you'll see a little paperclip next to this tab that's called attachments. Here we don't have any, but what you might find here, I think some current use staff are currently attaching paper copies or PDF copies of the application. So it's right there for you to view and you don't have to wait to get that in the mail, or maybe you don't have to pull out the file, though DAs like paper. So we always like to have those on hand. Is there anything else here, Michael, that your staff is attaching regularly?
Not that I know of, but if they are, I'll let them jump into the chat.
Okay, perfect. So most often, if I see an attachment here, it's because it is an application. Okay. And then we mentioned the questions feature. So in the event that Barnes Family LLP is not the same, in your opinion, as LLP2, and you wanted to let current use staff know that, we're going to utilize the questions function. If the current use staff has sent you a question or you have previously entered a question, you will see a red asterisk here saying that there is something over here to look at. Okay. And Pat Santoso from Axiomatic or Catalyst has just entered one that simply says test. So we see that it's there. If you want to pose a new question to your current use staff, and your district advisors can see this as well, but it's not on our work queue. So if you want to communicate with us, shoot us a text or a call and ask us to hop in and help. So new question, very simple. We have to enter a subject. So name mismatch. Owner in GL is an LLP2, but CU has only LLP. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save that question. And again, possibly to the detriment of your current use staff, there's no character limit here. But again, be courteous, be concise, and make your point clear, or ask them to give you a call. Okay, so we've saved that. You're going to see that that creates another question thread here. If your current use staff poses a question to you and you want to respond to them directly, in the VTPIE program, you click this little drop down here. We're going to view the question. And over here, these are some email type icons. So you can reply. Actually, I thought you could mark it as read, but you can't. So you have the opportunity to reply if they've asked you a question. That's not to say you can't email, but at least this keeps it with the parcel. That way, when your current use staff member happens to be in your particular town, it's all nice and tidy for them. Is that the way your staff likes to use this feature, Michael? Is it working well for you guys? I'm going to take silence as a yes. Okay. All right, so those are the 4 features or 4 tabs that we have in the current use application screen. Do we have any questions on those tabs yet?
I have, whoops, where did it go? Does anyone actually answer these questions? I asked a question last year and it is still in the queue. Oh, from the current use staff. So we don't get a notification when there is a question asked. This is from Ken, current use tech specialist. We don't get a notification when a question is asked, so we can take a very long time for us to find them, but it's still helpful to have them linked to the parcel.
Thank you for that clarification, Ken. That was not my understanding from Pat. But good to know. Thank you. But when you do go into a parcel, you see that same red asterisks identifying that there's a question, correct?
You'll wait for him to answer that, I guess. Yes,
Yes. Caitlin said yes. Okay,
Caitlin,
good.
yeah. So Caitlin also said, current use staff are not adding attachments regularly. The applications are added automatically.
Oh, good to know.
Oh, good.
And neat.
And that's Ken's. Should we be emailing besides putting them in the question queue? I would say yes.
Yeah. And our emails at the state, just like your emails in town, probably get pretty bogged down. I think it's easier to misplace an email than it is to misplace something that's in a question. But if you sent an email with more detail or some attachments, you could certainly put in your question, please see email on this date. And that might also be helpful.
So then we have, can we update the PVR mailing address for the landowner through VTPIE, or does the landowner need to contact them directly?
There's no functionality to do that. So I guess the answer by default is the taxpayer must contact current use.
I was asking towns to email specific questions. I apologize if that is not communicated to Vernon or other towns. The questions are helpful for general info at this point. That's from Nicholas.
Yeah, from Nick. Okay.
Yeah. It is an asterisk or an exclamation mark next to the question. What?
Oh, sorry, I went too far out. It's an exclamation. Hold on, let me get back there and I'll show you. There's a red exclamation. I may have said asterisks. I apologize.
Okay. And Town of Vernon. My question was eventually answering last year, but I did have an email to get the answer. Definitely have to follow up with call or email. She's just making a comment. And Michael said, we're working on making the question function better, as with a lot of other stuff right now.
That's a very fair statement, Michael. Thank you.
Yes. And that's it.
Okay.
Current use addresses should reflect what's in what the grand list has.
Well,
Agree,
not
but
a-
they're two different functions.
should, I guess, for the town's perspective, as long as the bill's getting paid, then we know that there's probably not a problem. There may be another reason that current use documents need to go to another address. So I wouldn't lose sleep over the fact that they don't match. You could certainly enter a question or send an email or reach out to the taxpayer and ask them if that's correct. And if it's not, then to reach out to the current use staff. If they get any notices from current use, those ag certifications, for example, we want to make sure they're going to the right address, but it doesn't mean that the tax bill has to go to that same address. All right. So what we have left here. So I'm going to scroll real quick, and I'm going to do it because I don't actually want you to pay attention to what's below this section on your screen. There's a lot of information here that looks an awful lot like what we're going to be doing in just a moment. The reason that it's there is this is also the same portal or the same function where current use staff are doing their work. Once they've finished an eCuse and it's pushed to VTPIE, we're all working in the same system. They work on this page. We listers have our own special verify page. So I always tell my listers to stop at this info notes and info box. Okay, this is where you're going to have a description of any excluded land. Admittedly, some are old and don't have a lot of description. Some that are newer are more detailed. Take it with a grain of salt, compare it to the application and what you know to be true. Anything to mention there about excluded descriptions, Christy? You're muted. Otherwise, I think that's probably a no.
Sorry, I lost you. No,
that-
I think you got it.
Okay. Unenrollment notes. If the parcel happens to be unenrolled, you will see whatever brief notes the current use staff have put there for public consumption. When you change acreage in the verify screen, the comment that you place in that the comment box that is required will show up here for both you and the staff. And I'm not quite sure why there are two change reasons here. But I'm only familiar with a comment popping up here. Michael, do you or your staff often see something in both of these fields?
Well, one's acreage and one's change. So, yeah, I don't know, to be honest with
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one is text and one is a drop-down menu. That is correct, because one of those, we were having issues with that not being a drop-down menu, and then that change was finally made by VTPIE just recently.
Certainly. Okay. That sounds familiar. And then all of the notes that used to exist in your NEMRIC current use exchange, if you remember that program, all of that history remained here in this PVR parcel change notes. And I believe continues to be expanded upon. Okay, so the information that's here is good to read through so you understand what may have changed with the parcel and even getting up to speed with what has happened in the past. So from there, we're going to go into this blue button, the blue verify screen. Okay, so this should look pretty familiar based on what we've seen over the last 2 days. This overview box here is reflective of exactly the last CAMA upload that was sent to you or sent by you into the VTPIE program. So, and by sent to, I mean, you've sent it out of your CAMA or out of your NEMRIC. You've gotten the little pop-up that says success. Now go to VTPIE and receive, right? To use Chris Mealy's analogy of the baseball, you've thrown it out of your CAMA or NEMRIC. Now we need to go to VTPIE and pick it up. Once you have picked it up and it's processed, this box will reflect that CAMA upload. Okay. It includes, excuse me, all of the things that we were talking about in the examples and throughout the training that we need to pay attention to. We have your total listed value, your land value. In this instance, it's the same and there are no buildings on this parcel. Reasonably here, enrolled buildings, 0. If there had been a number here, then we could click on this view and we'll get a pop-up of that section of the application to tell us exactly what has been enrolled for structures. Anything here, Christy?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay. And then here on the right-hand side of that overview box, we have homestead value if it exists on the parcel, non-homestead value if it exists on the parcel, house site, which isn't really relevant to what we do for current use, but we're going to put it there anyway, and the homestead flag status. Okay. And also when it was received. Okay. It's important to note that you may very well see a homestead value here noted, but if this homestead value or filed is no, we're still going to put everything in the non-homestead column. Okay. That number will come into play if and when they do file a homestead declaration. Okay. This is that same grid that we have been walking you through for the past 2 mornings. To enter your information, this one is already pre-populated with the full value of the land is enrolled. To make sure that nothing is excluded, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit and we're going to see the land box. And here we clearly see that we have 70 ag acres enrolled. Nothing is excluded and the total acreage is 70. Okay, so by default, we know that the entire value of the land is enrolled. Super simple one. We do have a feature here called View Valuation History. If this parcel has been saved and verified previously, then this box is going to show what it was last allocated as. So if in this particular year you did an upload and they built a barn, you have a new value, you need to reallocate, and maybe this number isn't here. Maybe that's been deleted. So you're like, well, what did I do before? You can click this view valuation history to see what the history showed on the last exchange. Excuse me. Okay. Down here, we talked about when our acreage and current use acreage doesn't match. So most often what I see here is they purchased some abutting acreage. So for example, if current use had 70 acres here, and we scroll back up to the top real quick, if this acre says 80, we know that we need to make those match. We're not going to match the current use number. We're going to tell current use what changed, and we're going to change this acreage grid at the bottom. Okay. So if they had purchased 10 acres of land that was not previously enrolled from their neighbor, we're going to plop all 10 acres right here and excluded. It doesn't have an existing enrollment. And if they want to enroll it, they're going to have to apply to current use to put those 10 acres in. Okay. If that 10 acres is from a previously enrolled parcel and say it was also ag, we're going to increase this number by 10. We'll put 80 here. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. And you'll see at the bottom of my screen, we just had some things pop up that weren't there before. Anytime a number here changes, you have to enter a reason that it's changed and a comment. I do not believe, let me just double check. Okay. So now if you go back to what it was before, this is new. It will not allow you to enter a comment. I believe last year, if you happen to change this number by accident, even if it was just to tab into the box, it was making you enter a comment. So I'm going to say that's a win for us this year. So let's put that back to 80. We're going to select a reason. There's any number of reasons here. Try to be accurate, but they aren't really consequential in my understanding. So there was an abutter, and we would type in purchased 10 enrolled acres from Smith. And then we could enter the span. That'll help your current use staff track down the application that lost 10 acres and also identify where the 10 acres was that might be added and reach out to the taxpayer for a new application. I'm sure it's more complex than that, Michael. Is there anything you want to say about what happens when when listers enter here and what your current use staff do?
No, we're just validating data, and if we have any questions, we'll reach out to the towns.
Okay. Last but not least, there is a notes and comments section. The key here being the current use staff does not get notified that there's anything here. It's there for them to see if they go in and happen to read it, but it's not going, this is not where you want to answer or ask a question. You want to use the questions feature or you want to reach out to your staff member directly. Okay, this is for your purposes and will live with a parcel as long as it's enrolled in current use. And I'm going to go back and change these acres, otherwise I won't be able to verify. So we see that total value is 61,500. Land value 61,500, and there's no homestead declaration filed. All of our columns are balanced to the top of this sheet plus the cost report. If you've made changes, they won't update until you click save. But then we're going to click save and verify, and we're going to hold our breath to see if this turns green or red. We have a green banner at the top. It says verify saved successfully. Okay. If that was not in balance, that would say, oops, you did X wrong. Say the non-homestead was not in balance. It'll tell you that specifically, and then you'll have to go back in and verify.